The river never decided to reach the ocean. It stopped resisting its own weight. There is a tightness in your chest that arrives before the number does. The body already knows. You have not even looked yet. You have not opened the app. You have not checked the balance. You have not read the message that contains the figure. And still, somewhere just below the collarbone, a small fist has already closed. It knows. It has known for years. And every time you have tried to think your way past it, every time you have repeated the words you were told to repeat, every time you have closed your eyes and visualized the life that was supposed to come, that small fist has tightened a fraction more. Every year you tried harder, the gap grew wider. No one warned you. No one told you that the effort itself had a frequency. No one told you that what you broadcast when you tried was not the picture of what you wanted, but the assumption underneath the picture, the assumption that what you wanted was not already yours, the assumption that you had to chase something that was running. No one told you that the chase was the proof of the absence, and that the field, whatever the field is, the intelligence that organizes what arrives at your door, was reading the chase and not the picture. So it kept sending you, with terrible patience, more of the chase, more of the running, more of the just out of reach. Because that is what your signal kept asking for, every single hour of every single day, even when you thought you were asking for the opposite. The oldest understanding of abundance was never about reaching. It was about ceasing to obstruct what already moves. There is something in that sentence you have to let settle before we go any further. The oldest understanding. Not the newest. Not the cleverest. Not the one with the most steps or the most expensive course or the most charismatic teacher. The oldest one. The one that was known before anyone tried to sell it. The one that knew, with a quiet certainty, that abundance was not a thing to be summoned because nothing real is ever summoned. Abundance was a movement that was already happening. The way water moves downhill, the way air fills a room when a door opens, the way warmth spreads when something cold is removed. The work was never to make it begin. The work was always, only, to stop preventing it. You were not failing at manifestation. You were succeeding at effort, and effort was always the wrong instrument. Something older than the trying has been underneath all along. Not waiting for you to do more. Waiting for you to stop blocking it. Let that one sit, too. Because if you let it land, if you let it past the Paulite nod and into the place where the small fist lives, something is going to loosen. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a small loosening. The way a knot that has been pulled tight for a long time releases the first quarter turn when you finally stop pulling on it. You have been pulling. You have been pulling so hard for so long that you forgot the rope was not asking you to pull. The rope was asking you to set it down. The real question is not how to attract wealth. It is why something in you has been quietly returning it every time it arrived. There is a word for what you have been carrying. It is not laziness. It is not failure. It is not even resistance. Exactly. Although resistance is part of the shape of it. It is frequency depth, and you have been paying the interest on it without knowing the principle existed. You have been paying it in tired afternoons, in unanswered messages, in opportunities that came close and then drifted, in money that arrived and then left more quickly than it should have, in the small daily tax of feeling that no matter what you did, you were always slightly behind. That is not life being unfair. That is interest on a debt you never signed for. And before we can do anything about it, before any of this can move, you have to understand what it actually is. Frequency depth is not a metaphor. It is the cumulative weight of every signal you have sent that contradicted what you said you wanted. Every time you reached, you broadcast that you did not have. Every time you affirmed, with a clenched jaw, that abundance was yours. You broadcast that you did not believe it. Every time you visualized from a place of urgency, you taught the receiving structure of your life that urgency was the language you spoke. And the field, with its terrible literal honesty, answered in the language you used. Not the language you wished you were using, the one you actually used. The one your body was speaking even while your mind was speaking something else. This is not the same as a limiting belief. You have heard about limiting beliefs. You have probably made lists of them. You have probably tried to argue with them, replace them, reframe them, tap on them, write them down and burn the paper. Some of that helped a little, for a while, and then the same pattern came back wearing a different mask. That is because the limiting belief was never the deepest layer. The limiting belief was the story your mind told itself about a frequency that had already been set somewhere underneath. You can change the story all you want. The frequency keeps broadcasting. The frequency does not care about your story. The frequency cares about the felt sense in your nervous system, and the felt sense was set long before your mind learned to talk. Let me show you what this looks like in a real life. There is a person, and this person, over a period of 7 or 8 years, has more than doubled their income. By every external measure, this person should feel like they are winning. The numbers are bigger. The job title is more impressive. The home is nicer. The vacations are more frequent. And yet, when this person opens the banking app on a Sunday morning, the same tightness arrives in the chest as arrived 8 years ago when the numbers were half as large. The number changed. The frequency did not. The amount of money in the account is now twice what it was, and the inner experience of money is exactly what it was, because the inner experience was never about the number. The inner experience was about a frequency that has not yet been touched. You may be that person, or you may be the other version of that person, the one whose numbers have not yet moved, the one who is still waiting for the doubling that is supposed to fix everything. It does not matter which one you are. The mechanism is identical. The frequency holds the position regardless of what the outer numbers do. That is what makes it a frequency. That is what makes it debt. The interest keeps accruing whether the principal is paid or not, whether you have noticed or not, whether anyone ever told you the account existed or not. So let me give you an image, and let this image stay with you, because it is going to come back several times in this audio, and each time it comes back, it will mean something a little different. There is a river. The river has always been moving. The river was moving before you were born, and the river will be moving long after you are, no longer here to think about it. The river is not a metaphor for something you have to build. The river is the thing that has always been there, underneath everything else. And across the river, at some point in your early life, a dam was built. You did not build the dam. That is the first thing you have to understand. The dam was built by the voices that came before you, by the inheritances you did not choose, by the conditions of the family or the culture or the moment in history that you were born into. Some of the stones in the dam were placed by people who loved you and were trying to protect you. Some of the stones were placed by people who were carrying their own dams and did not know any other way to hand something across. Some of the stones were placed by sheer accident, by overheard sentences, by the look on a face when money was mentioned. By the way, the adults in the room held their bodies when an envelope arrived in the mail. Stone by stone, year by year, the dam was built. By the time you were old enough to look at it, it was already higher than you were. And by the time you were old enough to wonder if you could move it, it had become invisible because you had stopped seeing it as a structure and started seeing it as the shape of the world. Behind the dam, there is not absence. Behind the dam, there is pressure. There is buildup. Everything you have been calling toward you, every opportunity, every connection, every form of abundance that has your name on it, has been pressing against the back of the dam for a long time. It has not been refusing to come. It has been waiting for an opening. And the opening will not be made by adding more water to the front of the river. The opening will be made by removing one stone. One. That is the entire work. Not constructing something new. Not summoning what is not there. just dismantling, with patient hands, what was inherited and what has been blocking what was already on its way. There are 3 movements you have to understand if any of this is going to land in the body and not just in the head. 3. No more. Because if there were 10, you would forget them. And frankly, the work of becoming the river was never about remembering 10 things. It was about feeling 3 things deeply enough that they began to operate without your remembering them at all. The first movement is this. Every act of effort broadcasts the assumption underneath the effort. What you do is not what the field receives. The field receives what the doing is broadcasting. Trying to attract wealth broadcasts the assumption that wealth is absent. The signal interruption begins inside the strategy, not after it fails. The interruption is not something that happens to the signal somewhere out in the world, on the way from your visualization to its arrival in your life. The interruption is built into the visualization itself, because the visualization was performed from a frequency of not yet having. And the field does not hear what you wanted to say. The field hears the frequency you set it in. Think about a phone call. You pick up the phone and you call a friend. 2 different versions of the same action. In the first version, you call because you genuinely want to hear their voice. You are not desperate. You are not lonely. You are full, and the call is an overflow of fullness. The friend, on the other end of the line, feels something specific when they answer. They feel met. They feel chosen. They feel that the call is a gift, not a request. The conversation flows. By the end of the call, both of you feel more alive than you did before. Now the second version. You call the same friend, the same time of day. You say almost the same words. But you are calling because you cannot stand to be alone with yourself for another 10 minutes. You are calling because the silence in your apartment has started to feel like an accusation. You are calling, although you would never say it this way, because you need the friend to confirm that you exist. The friend picks up. They cannot name what they feel, but they feel it. The conversation is heavier than the first one. The friend gets off the phone a little drained. They cannot say why. They just know they need a minute before they can do the next thing in their day. Same action, same words, different frequency, different result. Now apply that to money. Apply that to opportunity. Apply that to every act you have performed in the name of attracting abundance. The doing was identical. The frequency was the entire story. And no one ever told you that the frequency was the entire story, because the frequency cannot be sold to you in a course. The frequency can only be recognized in yourself, and once recognized, it cannot be untaught. The second movement is harder, because it explains why no amount of additional effort solves the problem. The reason this is invisible from the inside is that the trying feels virtuous. It feels like commitment. It feels like the opposite of giving up. Every spiritual community you have walked into has reinforced this. Try harder. Believe more. Do more visualizations. Wake up earlier. Journal more pages. Listen to more audios. The reward inside these communities is given to the people who try the most visibly. The exhaustion is read as devotion. The strain is read as faith. And so you, having shown up sincerely, have been rewarded for the very thing that was leaking your signal. That is the cruel symmetry of it. The harder you tried, the more virtuous you appeared. And the more virtuous you appeared, the more your trying was reinforced. And the more your trying was reinforced, the more your signal leaked. And the more your signal leaked, the further the result drifted. And the further the result drifted, the more you concluded that you must not be trying hard enough, and the cycle closed on itself like a hand, closing around a candle flame. The candle did not go out because the flame failed. The candle went out because the hand kept tightening to protect it. And this is why no amount of additional effort solves it. You cannot solve a frequency by adding more of the same frequency. Adding more effort does not change the frequency of effort. Adding more striving does not change the frequency of striving. You can stack visualizations on top of visualizations. You can layer affirmation on top of affirmation. You can journal 3 pages or 3,000 pages, and underneath all of it, the same frequency is humming. The frequency that says, I do not have this. The frequency that says, I am chasing. The frequency that says, please, please, please. The field hears the please. The field does not hear the words after the please. And so the field keeps sending you the conditions in which please make sense, which are conditions of lack. The third movement is the one that explains the persistence. The reason your life keeps returning to a certain shape, even when the outer circumstances change, is because there is a resonance floor inside you, an unconscious baseline that your nervous system has decided is safe. Your earnings can rise above the floor temporarily. Your relationships can rise above the floor temporarily. Your ease, your rest, your sense of well-being can rise above the floor temporarily. But the floor pulls. It does not pull violently. It pulls patiently. It pulls the way gravity pulls. And after a few weeks or a few months or a few years, the system has restored itself to the floor. This is why people who win the lottery so often lose the money. It is not a moral failing. It is not stupidity. It is a nervous system that recognized a number that was incompatible with its floor and went to work, instinctively, to restore the floor. The work was done unconsciously. Bad decisions, generous gestures, sudden expenses, lawsuits, family demands, addictions that had been dormant, all of these arrived not as bad luck, but as the floor calling its own back to itself. And this is also why people who lose everything in fires or divorces or business collapses so often rebuild to almost the exact same amount they had before. It is not because they are talented or disciplined. Some of them are not particularly talented and not particularly disciplined. It is because the floor calls its own back. The floor does not care about the number. The floor cares about the frequency the body recognizes as home. And the body will work, in ways the mind never sees, to bring the outer world back into alignment with the inner home. The floor is not the number. The floor is the frequency the body recognizes as home. Read that sentence again, slowly, and let it land before you continue. Now, here is the implication you do not want to be true. If this is real, and you already feel that it is, then every visualization you ever did from effort has been reinforcing the floor. Every affirmation you ever said from desperation has been broadcasting desperation. Every gratitude list you wrote with a tightness in your chest taught the field that gratitude in your system lives next to tightness. The years of work were not wasted, and we are going to come back to that. But they were not building what you thought they were building. They were building a more elaborate dam. They were placing stones with great care and great sincerity, and the stones were stones. I am not going to soften this for you, because if I soften it, it will slide off, and you have been letting these truths slide off for too long. The years of effort built a more sophisticated dam. The vision boards added stones. The affirmations added stones. The rituals added stones. Not because rituals are bad, not because vision boards are bad, but because every single one of them was performed in the frequency of needing them to work. And the needing them to work was the dam, and the dam grew, and the river was still on the other side. You feel that somewhere in the chest. There is a small contraction happening right now. That is the body recognizing something it has been afraid to name. Stay with it. The contraction is not bad news. The contraction is the moment before something opens. Let it be there. Do not argue with it. Do not soothe it with another affirmation. Just let it be the shape of what is true for 1 minute. And now, the small relief. The years were not wasted. They were the only path that could have brought you to a moment where this would land. If anyone had said these words to you 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago, you would have heard them and you would have moved on. The words would have sounded interesting, perhaps even true, And they would not have done a single thing inside your body because your body was not yet tired enough to receive them. The exhaustion of trying was the curriculum. The exhaustion was what made you finally ready to consider that the instrument itself was wrong. The work was not the leak. The frequency of the work was the leak. Hold that one, because in that sentence is the absolution your nervous system has been waiting for. You did not waste the years. The years brought you here. But you can stop, now, doing the work in the frequency that was leaking it. You can keep the practices if you want to keep them. You can drop them if you want to drop them. What changes is not what you do. What changes is the frequency from which you do it. And that change is not something you accomplish by trying. That change is something that begins to happen the moment you see, clearly, that trying was the leak. There is something underneath this you have not seen yet. The dam was not the obstacle. The dam was the symptom of an older obstruction, one that was operating before the dam was ever built. What is upstream of the dam is what we have not yet named. If the resonance floor and frequency depth were the whole story, then every person who learned these concepts would shift immediately. And you already know they do not. You have met them. You may have been them. People who can articulate every layer of this teaching, people who can quote the books and lead the workshops and explain frequency to a stranger at a dinner party, and whose own lives still show the same pattern repeating, the same near misses, the same arrivals that turn into departures, the same numbers that move up briefly and then come home to the floor. This does not mean what we have said so far is wrong. It is not wrong. It is incomplete. There is something underneath the resonance floor that the resonance floor itself has been protecting. The floor was not the bottom. The floor was the lid on something deeper. And until we go underneath the floor will keep doing its work, no matter how many times we name it. So now we have to go down one more layer. And this layer is the one that almost nobody touches, because it is not as glamorous as the language of frequency and the field. This layer is intimate. This layer is the layer of your body, your specific body, in a specific moment when something good arrives at the door and you have to decide in less than a second whether to let it in. I want to give you the name first, and then we will spend a long time unfolding it, because if we do not unfold it slowly, the name will sound like another piece of jargon and the body will not register what it points to. The name is the receiving layer. The receiving layer is the part of you that opens or stays closed when what was called for arrives. And almost everything you have ever read about abundance has focused on the calling, and almost nothing has focused on the receiving. You have been training the caller. The receiver was never trained. In fact, and this is the harder thing, the receiver was trained to close. Let me show you what the receiving layer looks like in a small way before we look at it in the big ways. Someone offers you a compliment. Not a manipulative one, not one with a hook in it, just a sincere small compliment. They say, "That color looks good on you." Or, "You handled that beautifully." Or, "I really appreciate what you did yesterday." Watch what happens in your body in the half second after the compliment arrives. For most people, what happens is a tiny, almost invisible deflection. The shoulders rise a quarter of an inch. The breath gets shallow. The mouth says, "Oh, this old thing," or, "Well, anyone would have done it," or, "You are too kind," or some other deflection that the speaker has heard 1,000 times, and that is, in its essence, a no. The compliment was a small gift. The body said no to the gift. The mind did not have time to participate in the decision. The receiving layer did the work before the mind could be consulted. Now apply that exact reflex to money, to opportunity, to love, to rest, to help that is offered, to time that someone tries to give you, to care that is extended. The same reflex is operating all day, every day, in dozens of small interactions, none of which feel significant at the time. And each one is rehearsing the closure. Each one is training the receiving layer to be a little more efficient at saying no without you noticing. The receiving layer is not random. It is not a personality flaw. It is not a failure of self-worth, although self-worth language has been used to describe its effects. The receiving layer was trained, specifically, by experience. By the experiences of childhood that were earlier than memory, and the experiences of adolescence that you do remember, and the experiences of early adulthood when you were still soft and learning what the world cost. Every moment in early life when receiving was followed by withdrawal, the receiving layer learned. Every moment when a gift came with strings attached, the receiving layer learned. Every moment when affection was given and then weaponized, the receiving layer learned. Every moment when help was offered and then rescinded, the receiving layer learned. Every moment when praise was followed by an unspoken expectation that you would now have to perform at that level forever, the receiving layer learned. And the lesson it learned in all of these moments was the same. Open hands are dangerous. Close before the thing lands. Better to refuse the gift than to discover, after accepting it, what the gift actually cost. By adulthood, the closure is automatic. You do not feel yourself closing. You feel the opportunity not work out. You feel something coming up. You feel that it was not the right time. You feel that you needed to think about it. You feel that you did not deserve it. You feel that there must be a catch. You feel that you could not possibly accept. All of these feelings, every single one of them, is the receiving layer doing what it was trained to do and presenting its decision to your mind as if your mind were the one making it. The closure interprets itself as circumstance. The closure is so efficient that it produces a story in real time about why the closure was necessary. And now, the cruel part. Why effort makes this worse. Why all of your work has made this worse. Because effort is closed-handed. Receiving requires open hands. Every act of trying harder is, at the level of the body, a clench. The fists tighten. The jaw sets. The shoulders rise. The breath becomes shallow and high in the chest. And in that posture, you are rehearsing with your body the very closure that the receiving layer was already practicing. Every visualization performed with grip teaches the receiving layer that grip is the relationship to what is wanted. Every affirmation said with insistence reinforces that insistence is the way you relate to what you do not yet have. The harder the trying, the tighter the closure. The tighter the closure, the less can land. The less that lands, the more the trying feels necessary. The more the trying feels necessary, the harder the trying becomes. And around it goes, year after year, with you wondering why the same thing keeps happening when you are trying so very hard for it not to. This is the loop. Name it as a loop. See it as a loop. Because once you can see it as a loop, you can begin to feel where you are inside it. You have been working on the calling. The closing has been working on you. Read that sentence twice. You have been working on the calling. The closing has been working on you. While you were focused on the front of the river, busy summoning more water, the back of the dam was being reinforced in your own body by the very posture you were summoning from. The closing was efficient. The closing was patient. The closing did not need your attention to keep doing its work. It had been doing its work since before you could form words. Now, do you remember the phrase I left with you at the end of the first concept? What is upstream of the dam? Let it come back now, but do not announce it. Let it arrive the way a friend arrives after a long absence and sits down in the chair they used to sit in without anyone saying a word. Upstream of the dam is not more river. Upstream of the dam is the source, and the source is the receiving layer. The dam was the structure built downstream in your visible life to manage what the source was already trying not to release. You have spent years trying to dismantle the dam, by which we mean the practices, the habits, the visible spiritual work of attracting and calling and aligning and shifting. And the dam has not moved much, because the dam is downstream of everything that matters. The The dam is downstream of the receiving layer. The dam was built to be congruent with the receiving layer. The receiving layer set the floor. The floor set the dam. The dam set the visible life. Feel what happens when you let that reorganize. Everything we said before is still true, but it is sitting in a new place now. Frequency depth is real, and frequency depth is downstream of the receiving layer. The resonance floor is real, and the resonance floor is set by the receiving layer. The signal interruption is real, and the signal interruption happens because the receiving layer was closing as the signal was being sent. All of the previous teaching, accurate as it was describing the symptoms of a single condition, and the single condition is in the receiving layer. So sit with this. Do not rush to do something with it. There is no instruction here. Not yet. What was just named has to be felt before it can be applied. If you try to apply it before you feel it, you will turn it into another stone in the dam. You will turn the receiving layer into another thing to fix, another thing to work on, another thing to grip, and the grip will close the very layer you are trying to open. So just let it be there for a moment without doing anything with it. The receiving layer is older than the trying. Always was. There is one more layer underneath this, and we have to go to it. Because if we stop at the receiving layer, we will have given you most of the picture, but not all of it. And you have not come this far for most of the picture. You have come for the whole shape. The receiving layer was built by something. The receiving layer was not invented out of thin air by a child's body. The receiving layer was built by what the inner economy decided you could keep. And the inner economy is the next thing we have to name. There is an accounting system inside you that has been running since before you could speak. It tracks what you have been allowed to receive and what you have been required to return. Every child, in the first few years, learns not only what is forbidden, but, more importantly, what is allowed. The forbidden things are loud. The forbidden things have explicit names. The forbidden things produce visible consequences. But the allowed things are silent. The allowed things are the ceiling. The allowed things define the upper edge of what is, for this body, considered normal and safe. A child learns, very early, how much praise they are allowed to absorb before the praise turns into an expectation. A child learns how much affection they are allowed to receive before the affection comes with a debt. A child learns how much rest they are allowed to take before the rest becomes laziness. A child learns how much joy they are allowed to express before the joy becomes too much, and the allowed becomes the ceiling. The ceiling becomes the inner economy, and the inner economy runs the books for the rest of the life. There are two ledgers. The outer economy is the one you can see. It is in the bank statement. It is in the salary. It is in the expenses, the debts, the savings, the investments. It is the visible accounting of your life. The inner economy is invisible. It is the energetic accounting that decides, in real time, what is keepable, what must be returned, what is too much to hold. The outer follows the inner. Always. This is not a metaphor. This is a fact about how the two ledgers interact. When the outer exceeds the inner ledger, the inner economy goes to work to restore balance. This is what happens with inheritances that disappear, with lottery winnings that evaporate, with sudden raises that are followed by sudden expenses, with windfalls of every kind that somehow, mysteriously, in 18 to 36 months, are gone. The mystery is not a mystery. The inner ledger went to work. The inner ledger said, "This exceeds what we are allowed to keep," and it set about the patient business of bringing the outer back to the inner. Why is the inner ledger so rigid? Why does it not learn? Why does it not update itself when the adult version of you has clearly demonstrated, by surviving and earning and managing, that more is now safe? Because the inner ledger was set by survival logic, and the survival logic was set by a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, and that child's calculation of what is safe to receive is still running the books at 35 or 45 or 60. No amount of adult earning convinces a 3-year-old's nervous system that more is allowed. The 3-year-old made a decision in a specific moment that you do not consciously remember about how much was safe to take, and the 3-year-old has been honoring that decision faithfully for decades with no one to tell it that the world has changed. Your bank account is not what your bank says. It is what your nervous system has decided you are allowed to keep. This is the inner ledger. This is the layer underneath the layer. This is what was making the receiving layer close. The receiving layer was not closing for fun. The receiving layer was closing in obedience to a ledger that had already calculated what was too much. The ledger said no. The receiving layer enacted the no. The dam was built to make the no visible in the outer life, and the outer life kept performing the no in shapes that looked like circumstance. Now, here is where it gets harder. Every act of striving creates an internal IU. I worked hard for this, the inner ledger writes, and the line item gets entered. It is owed. I sacrificed for this, the ledger writes, and the entry doubles. It must be paid back. The harder the effort, the larger the debt, the system records. And by the time the abundance arrives at the door, the inner ledger has already marked it as owed somewhere else. It was promised in advance. It was committed before it arrived. It leaves before it lands. Watch this happen in real life. The entrepreneur who finally lands the contract they have been working toward for 2 years, and within a week of signing, an unexpected expense arises that swallows almost the exact amount of the windfall. Freelancer whose breakthrough payment comes in, the payment that was supposed to change everything, and within a month, the car breaks down, or the tooth cracks, or the family member calls with a request that cannot be refused. These are not coincidences. These are not bad luck. The inner ledger balances itself. The inner ledger had already promised the money to debt the moment the effort that produced the money was paid. The money was never going to land. It was on a route that had been determined before it arrived. There is a name for the threshold the inner economy will not let abundance cross until the books are rewritten. The name is the abundance membrane. It is a membrane because it is not solid, and it is not impermeably. It is selective. It opens for certain frequencies and closes for others. It opens for what the inner ledger has approved and closes for what the inner ledger has not. And no amount of pushing from the outside, no amount of effort or strategy or hope or prayer in the wrong frequency will move it. The membrane responds to what the inner ledger has already calculated, and only to that. Now, the most uncomfortable section of this audio, and you have to let it in, because if you do not let it in, the rest will not be available. You have been giving from depletion your entire life. Time, energy, money, care, attention. You have been the one who pays. You have been the one who picks up the slack. You have been the one who arrives early and stays late, who notices what others need before you notice what you need, who anticipates and prevents and absorbs and smooths, who makes things easier for the people around you, who carries more than your share because you saw that the share was not going to be carried otherwise. This was registered by the inner economy as a single, very clear identity. I am the one who pays, not I am the one who receives. The giving felt virtuous. It probably was virtuous in the sense that it produced visibly good in the lives of other people. But underneath the visible virtue, the withholding from self was hidden. Every act of giving from depletion was a confirmation to the inner ledger that you are the source, not the recipient. Every act of giving from depletion was a stone in the dam, even though it looked like a stone in someone else's life. The inner ledger does not care about the destination of the giving. The inner ledger cares about the role the giving establishes. And the role established by giving from depletion is the role of the one who does not get to receive. You were not bad at receiving. You were excellent at proving you didn't need to. Let that one land. Because there is a part of you that has been very proud of not needing. There is a part of you that has built an identity around the not needing. There is a part of you that has been quietly contemptuous of people who appear to need. and every act of pride in your own self-sufficiency was another small declaration to the inner ledger that the books are settled in this direction. The flow goes outward from you. The flow does not come toward you. You are the one who can be relied on. You are the one who does not have to be taken care of. You are the strong one. And the strong one, by definition, is the one whose receiving layer has been welded shut from the inside by the strength itself. I am going to soften this now, because if I do not soften it, you will close the audio, and we are not done. This is not a flaw. This was protection. A child who learned that receiving costs more than giving becomes an adult who preempts the cost by never receiving. That child was right at the time. The cost was real. The receiving in that household, or in that classroom, or in that early relationship did cost more than the giving. The child made a calculation that was accurate for the conditions they were in, and the calculation has been running ever since in conditions that no longer require it. The adult you are now could afford to receive. The world you are in now would not punish you for receiving. But the child is still doing the math on a calculator from 30 years ago, with a settings file from a household that no longer exists. When the inner economy begins to shift, the first signs are very small. You will not see more money in the account. Not yet. The outer economy is the slowest layer to respond. What you will see are different reactions to small acts of receiving. The unexpected gift that, for the first time, is not deflected. The compliment that is allowed to land for a full second before the mind reaches for the deflection. The rest that is not preemptively followed by overwork to balance the books. The favor that you accept without immediately calculating what you owe in return. These are the early signals. These are how you know the ledger is being rewritten. The outer economy follows. Always follows, but slower than you would prefer. So now we have 4 names. Frequency that, the resonance floor, the receiving layer, the inner economy. And I want you to feel, before we go further, that these are not 4 separate things. They are 4 names for the same thing, seen from 4 different angles. They are 4 words for one shape. And the shape has been the shape of you the whole time. All 4 names point to one shape. And it has been the shape of you the whole time. The dam, the floor, the receiving layer, the inner economy, all of them are the same structure, named from different distances. The structure is the part of you that was taught, very early, to be the obstacle. Not because you were wrong, not because there is something deficient in you, not because you failed a moral or spiritual test, but because at one point in your life, being the obstacle was the only way to be safe. The system that closed you was protecting you from a world that was not yet ready to let you receive. The closing was an act of intelligence in the conditions it was made in. The closing kept you alive in the only way the child you were knew how to be kept alive. The closing was love, in the only form love could take in that room. And now, the world has changed, and the closing has not. The closing is still doing its job, faithfully, in a world that no longer requires it. And the work, the only work, the work that has been waiting for you for years, is to let the closing know that the conditions have changed. The river does not become wealthy. The river does not attract water. The river is the unobstructed movement of water that was already moving. You do not need to summon abundance. You need to stop being the dam. You do not need to add a new identity. You need to subtract the structure that was inherited. Becoming the river is not a transformation. It is a subtraction. You do not add abundance to yourself. You remove what was blocking the abundance you have always been inside of. You have always been inside of it. That is the part nobody told you. The river was not somewhere else. The river was not waiting for you to find it. The river was the medium you were already in. You were in the water. You were made of the water. The thing you were calling toward you was the thing that was already, in every moment, the substance of you. The dam was not separating you from the river. The dam was inside the river. You, damned, were a part of the river that had been taught to hold itself back from itself. This is what every ancient understanding was pointing toward. Effortless action, not the absence of motion. The absence of resistance to motion that was already happening. The traditions that spoke of this knew that the work was never to push the river. The work was to recognize that you and the river were never two things, and that the pushing was the only thing maintaining the illusion that you were separate from what you were trying to call. The original frequency is not a state to be reached. It is a state to be returned to. There is a moment, and you may have felt it once or twice in your life, when something opens that you did not open on purpose, and what arrives is not exactly happiness, but a kind of relief that is much older than happiness. That is the frequency return. That is the body recognizing the original signal and the obstructions beginning to clear. It does not happen because you achieved it. It happens because, for a moment, you stopped doing the thing that was preventing it. Frequency return is not earned. Frequency return is the natural state revealed when interference subsides. What does becoming the river actually feel like in a specific body, in a specific day? Not euphoria, not bliss, not constant peace. The texture is more particular than that. The texture is the absence of internal argument. The thing you wanted does not feel farther away or closer. It feels available. Not because circumstances changed, because the internal not yet stopped arriving in the body before every opportunity. The reflex of preemptive closure begins to soften. Decisions feel lighter. Not because the decisions are easier. Because the apparatus of deciding is no longer running every option through the inner ledger before answering. Resentment of others' abundance softens. This is one of the first changes you will notice, and it is one of the most reliable signs that the river is forming. When the people around you receive something good, you notice that your reaction has shifted from a small tightening to something more spacious. Not because you became a better person. Because the structure that was closed has loosened, and a closed structure resents abundance in others because it confirms what the structure already feels. That abundance happens elsewhere, to other people, not here. When the structure opens, the abundance of others does not threaten you. The abundance of others is evidence that abundance is moving. The chest tightening before the bank app stops happening. This will surprise you. It will happen one ordinary morning, and you will open the app, and you will look at the number, and you will notice, only afterward, that the small fist did not arrive. It does not feel like victory. It feels like the absence of a habit you had stopped consciously noticing. That absence is the river. Effort still occurs, but without grip. You still work. You still act. You still build. But the texture of the working is different. What used to feel like striving feels like leaning. The body is no longer braced against the work. The body is moving with the work. You may, in fact, do more than you used to, but you will be more tired in a way that is satisfying and less tired in a way that is depleting. Those are two different tirednesses. One belongs to the river. One belonged to the dam. The most common misunderstanding of this teaching, and we have to address it directly, is the fear that becoming the river means doing nothing. If I stop trying, won't I just do nothing? No. The river does not do nothing. The river moves constantly. The river moves more in a single day than most people move in a year. What ends is the wrong instrument, not motion itself. Becoming the river does not mean ceasing to act. It means acting from a frequency that does not contradict what is being called in. Work happens. Effort happens. But striving, defined as effort that broadcasts lack, is what ends. The river works harder than anything in the landscape. It just never tries. That sentence is worth holding for a moment. The river works harder than anything in the landscape. It just never tries. The work is not eliminated. The trying is eliminated. And the difference between work and trying is everything we have been pointing at. Now, let me name you, specifically, in the condition you have been in, not by demographic, by condition. You have spent years doing what was supposed to work. You have been told the failure was in your belief, your worthiness, your discipline, your alignment. You have been told that if you just affirmed more, or visualized more vividly, or cleared more energy, or did more inner child work, or read more books, or attended more retreats, the thing would shift. None of that was the layer. The layer was the trying itself. It was not your fault. No one teaches the receiving layer. No one teaches the inner economy. You learned what was available to learn, and what was available was the calling, not the receiving. The path you walked was the only path that was on offer, and you walked it with sincerity, and the sincerity itself was held against you by a system that reads sincerity as effort and effort as lack. So what becomes possible now? Not promises, not predictions. Possibilities that follow naturally from what was just understood. Without instruction, without 5 steps, without a program to enroll in. The next time effort rises in your body, you will feel it differently. You will feel, in real time, the way the effort closes the hand, and you will have a choice you did not have before. The next time abundance approaches, in whatever form, the closure will be visibly. You will be able to see the receiving layer move, and you will be able to choose, in the half second before the closure completes, to let it stay open a little longer. The next time something is offered to you, attention or care or time or money or ease, you will notice whether you deflected before you even decided to. These noticings are the work, not adding practices. Noticing what was always happening underneath the practices you were already doing. I want to leave you with one thing to do tonight, and it is not an exercise, and it is not a meditation, and it is not anything you have to add to your life. It is one observation. Before you fall asleep tonight, find one moment from today when someone tried to give you something. Attention, care, time, money, ease, an offer of help, a compliment, a favor, anything. And notice what your body did in the half second before you decided how to respond. That half second is the receiving layer. That is where the river begins, not in the response. In the half second before the response. The half second is where the structure lives, and the half second is where the structure can be felt, and the half second is where the loosening starts. You will not be able to do this every time. Most of the half seconds will pass without your noticing. But every now and then, one will land in your awareness, and you will see the closure happen, and you will see it without judgment, and that seeing will, by itself, change something. The receiving layer cannot be forced open. The receiving layer can only be witnessed, and the witnessing, repeated over time, is what allows it to relax. There are 3 frequencies a person operates from in any given moment of relationship with abundance. 3. Naming them is what allows you to feel which one you are inside of in any given hour of your life. Because once you can feel the frequency, you have a relationship to it. And before you can feel it, you are simply living inside it without knowing that there is a choice. The first is the frequency of pursuit. The frequency of pursuit broadcasts a single message. I do not have this yet. Every action taken from pursuit reinforces the absence of the thing being pursued. The body in pursuit is tight. The breath is shallow. The mind is calculating, constantly, the gap between where it is and where it wants to be. Pursuit is felt as striving, as urgency, as the chest tightening before the bank app, as the silent calculation that runs behind every interaction, every social encounter, every email. Pursuit is the most common frequency on Earth. Pursuit is often mistaken for ambition. Pursuit is often praised by the cultures that train it as drive, as hustle, as commitment. And pursuit is, at its core, the frequency that guarantees the thing pursued will remain just out of reach, because the pursuit itself is the broadcast of its absence. The second is the frequency of waiting. Waiting broadcasts a different message, but a message that is equally clear to the field. I will receive when I deserve to. Waiting reinforces the conditional structure that decides who gets what and when. Waiting is felt as patience, but the patience is fear in slow motion. Waiting is felt as surrender, but the surrender is a withdrawal in disguise. Waiting often arrives after a long period of pursuit, when pursuit has exhausted itself, and the person decides, with what feels like wisdom, to step back, to trust, to allow. And the stepping back, if it carries the same frequency of not yet, is just pursuit in slower clothing. The field hears it the same way. Waiting is often mistaken for spiritual progress. The person who has moved from pursuit to waiting often believes they have done significant inner work. And they have. But the work has not yet reached the frequency. The work has reorganized the surface. Underneath, the same message is being sent. I am not yet allowed. The third is the frequency of the river. The river broadcasts nothing, because there is nothing to broadcast when the broadcaster is not in deficit. The river is not signaling its absence. The river is not signaling its deserving. The river is simply moving in the way water moves when nothing is obstructing it, and the movement itself is what the field reads. The river is felt as spacious motion, as action without grip, as the willingness to receive that does not collapse into entitlement. The river is not lazy. The river is not passive. The river is in motion all the time. But the motion is not pulled by lack. The motion is the natural state of a system that has stopped resisting itself. The first two frequencies are heard by the field as the same signal. This person is in lack. Only the third is heard as availability. That is worth holding. Because most of the spiritual work that calls itself surrender is really the second frequency, the frequency of waiting, dressed up in the vocabulary of trust. The field does not respond to the vocabulary. The field responds to the frequency underneath, and the frequency of waiting is the same broadcast as the frequency of pursuit with a different tempo. Both say I do not have. Both reinforce the absence. Only the third frequency says, in a tone the field can recognize, I am here, I am moving, I am open, and what is on its way is welcome. How does this scale up? How does it scale out? The same pattern operates at every level. Civilizations that strive collapse under the weight of their own striving. Civilizations that obstruct nothing endure. Forests do not try to grow. Forests grow because the conditions of growing are present and nothing is preventing them. Stars do not exert themselves. Stars burn because the conditions of burning are present, and the burning is the natural state of those conditions. The intelligence that organizes everything, whatever you want to call that intelligence, responds, at every scale, to the same principle. Motion without resistance to its own movement. The river, the forest, the star, the galaxy, the single human body, the same principle, the same response, and then back to the single human body, the single nervous system, the single moment. Because the cosmic view is only useful if it lands here, in this evening, in this room, in this body that is listening to this audio. The decision tonight, when you finish this, to not check the account one more time before bed. The decision to receive the compliment from your partner without immediately diminishing it. The decision to accept the favor without pre-calculating what is owed. The decision to let yourself rest when rest is offered by your own body without overworking the next day to compensate. These are not small. These are the field of intelligence, expressed at human scale, in one nervous system, one moment at a time. The cosmic principle and the small evening decision are not two different things. They are the same thing, looked at from different distances. Let me come back now to the cost, to the years. Because I have not let you out of the room where the years went. From the perspective of everything you have built, everything you have learned, everything you have become, The years of effort were not waste. They were not the obstruction either. They were the structure that brought you to a place where this would land. Without the years of striving, this teaching would not have arrived in your body. It would have stayed an idea. It would have sounded clever. It would not have softened anything. The trying was the curriculum. The exhaustion was the threshold. The exhaustion is what makes the river possible now. Effort that has not been exhausted cannot yet release. The hand cannot open if the hand has not first closed completely. The closing was necessary. The closing was the exhaustion. The exhaustion is the doorway. And the dam, in this final image, returns. But it returns with a different meaning. The dam was not the enemy. The dam was the container that allowed enough pressure to build that one stone could finally fall. Without the dam, the pressure would have dispersed. Without the pressure, no stone would have been pushed. The dam, which felt like the problem, was actually the apparatus that made the moment of release possible. The exhaustion of the dam, the years of holding back, were the storage of the energy that is now beginning to move. You did not fail at the path. The path was the failure, and the failure was the doorway. The abundance membrane from earlier returns now too. It is not solid. It is selective. It opens for certain frequencies and remains closed to others. And now, finally, you can name the frequencies. You can name the one you have been broadcasting. You can name the one that opens the membrane. You can feel, in a way you could not feel before, the difference between the frequency that the membrane responds to and the frequency that it does not. The membrane has been thinner than it ever seemed. It only required the broadcaster to change. There is more here, and I want to give it to you, because we have time, and because the things that have not yet been said are the things that, in the long run, will hold the most. I want to spend some time on something that has been moving underneath all of this and has not yet been named directly. It is the relationship between effort and identity. Because effort is not just a behavior. Effort, after years of being practiced, becomes a self. The person you have been is, in significant part, the person who tries. The person who works hard. The person who does not give up. The person who keeps going when others would have stopped. This self has been useful. This self has gotten you through difficult periods. This self has, in many cases, been admired by the people around you. And this self has also been, simultaneously, the dam. The trying self and the dam are not two different things that happen to coexist. They are the same construction, looked at from different angles. From the inside, it feels like the trying self. From the field's perspective, it shows up as the dam. And here is the part that is uncomfortable. If the dam is going to soften, the trying self is going to have to soften, and the softening of the trying self can feel, at first, like a kind of identity loss, like a kind of disorientation, like a question about who you are if you are not the one who is trying. This is one of the reasons the work is slower than people expect. The work is not just nervous system work. The work is also identity work. The trying self has been holding things together for a long time. The trying self has been protecting you, in its own way, from a different kind of fear. The fear that if you stop trying, you will not be anyone. The fear that the trying is what makes you valuable. The fear that without the effort, you would be exposed as someone who was, all along, not enough. These fears are not silly. These fears are real artifacts of the early conditions that built the trying self in the first place. The trying self was built, often, by environments that rewarded effort and ignored being. The child learned, early, that being was not enough to secure care. The child learned that doing was what produced response. The child internalized doing as the path to safety, and the doing, repeated, became the self. The being was buried. The being was forgotten, almost. And the doing self, The trying self was what walked into adulthood, and what built the visible life, and what carried the dam wherever it went. To release the dam, you have to allow the being self to come forward again. The being self does not have to do anything to be valuable. The being self is not in competition. The being self is not performing. The being self is what was there, originally, before the doing self was constructed on top of it. The being self is in the river. The being self has always been in the river. The doing self was constructed on the bank of the river to do work that the being self was not safe enough to receive. This is delicate work, and I want to be careful with it, because the trying self does not need to be killed. The trying self does not need to be ashamed of itself. The trying self has been doing its best with the information it had for a long time. The work is not to destroy the trying self. The work is to give the being self room to also exist, to create, inside your life, places where the being self gets to be present, where you are not trying, where you are not performing, where you are not producing, where you are simply present in your own life without needing to justify the presence. These places can be small. They can be 5 minutes in the morning before the day's effort begins. They can be a walk where you do not measure the walk. They can be a meal eaten slowly with no other agenda than the eating. They can be a conversation with a friend where you are not solving anything, not performing anything, not strategizing anything, just present. These small places are not luxuries. These small places are where the being self comes back into form. And as the being self comes back into form, the trying self softens, because it is no longer the only self carrying the weight. The weight gets distributed. The being self carries its part. The trying self can rest more. This is part of why the work of becoming the river often involves what looks, from the outside, like rest, like slowing down, like doing less. People notice and worry. People say, "Are you okay? You seem different." The trying self may even worry internally. Am I being lazy? Am I losing my edge? Am I going to fall behind? These worries are the trying self trying to maintain itself. The worries are not, themselves, the truth. The truth is that the system is rebalancing. The trying self is giving up some of the territory it had taken over, and the being self is reclaiming part of that territory. The total is not less productive. The total is differently productive. And in many cases, over time, the total is more effective because the being self has access to a kind of intelligence that the trying self does not have. The intelligence of the being self is the intelligence that knows when to act and when to wait. It is the intelligence that recognizes the resonance of an opportunity before the analytical mind has finished its evaluation. It is the intelligence that feels which person to call and which person to leave alone, which decision to make today and which decision to let mature, which step to take and which step to skip. This intelligence is not strategic. This intelligence does not produce articulate justifications for its choices. This intelligence simply feels what is moving and moves with it. And when this intelligence is allowed to operate, the visible life begins to flow in a different way, because the choices being made are no longer choices made against the grain of what wants to happen. They are choices made with the grain. This is one of the most concrete results of the work, the grain. You begin to feel the grain of your own life. The grain is the direction in which your life is, without your forcing it, already inclined to move. There is a grain. It exists. It has existed since before you were born. You did not invent it. You did not have to construct it. The grain is what your life wants to do, if you stop pushing it in the direction the trying self has decided it should go. The grain is what the river was always pointed toward. When you are operating against the grain, life feels like effort. Every step requires force. Every result requires fight. Every accomplishment is followed by a brief satisfaction and then a quick return to the next effort. The fatigue is constant. The doubts are constant. The sense that something is not quite working is constant, even when individual results are positive. When you are operating with the grain, life still has challenges. The grain is not the absence of challenge, but the challenges feel different. The challenges feel like the natural friction of moving, not like the unnatural friction of moving in the wrong direction. The fatigue, when it comes, feels earned. The satisfaction, when it comes, lasts. The sense that something is fundamentally right underneath the day-to-day variations becomes a steady background hum. Finding the grain is not a procedure. The grain reveals itself as the trying softens. The trying was the noise that was making the grain inaudibly. When the noise softens, the grain becomes audible, not as a voice, as a felt sense, as a quiet preference that has been there all along, that was being overridden by the trying self's louder demands. You may have moments in the work where you suddenly feel the grain for the first time in a long time. The moments will not be dramatic. They will be quiet recognitions. A small, "Oh, this is what I actually want to be doing." A small, "Oh, this is the conversation I have been needing to have." A small, "Oh, this is the work that has been waiting for me." The grain is patient. The grain does not insist. The grain simply makes itself available, and when you are quiet enough to feel it, the grain shows you where it is pointed. This relationship between effort and grain is at the core of what becoming the river really means. The river does not effort. The river follows its own grain. The grain of the river is the landscape it is moving through. The river does not fight the landscape. The river does not try to flow uphill. The river does not waste itself in confrontations with obstacles. It can simply go around. The river moves with what is there, and in moving with what is there, it shapes the landscape it moves through in ways that no force could have accomplished. The Grand Canyon was not carved by trying. The Grand Canyon was carved by water that followed its grain for so long that the landscape itself bent to accommodate it. Your life can do something like that if you let it, not by force, by patient, repeated following of the grain. Year after year, decade after decade, the accumulated effect of moving with the grain is greater, by far, than the accumulated effect of moving against it with effort. The water that follows its grain becomes a canyon. The water that tries to climb the hill evaporates. Now I want to speak directly, for a moment, to something that may be sitting in you that has not yet been addressed. There may be a part of you that is asking, but what about agency? What about choice? What about responsibility? If I just let things happen, doesn't that make me passive? Doesn't that abandon my power? This is a fair question, and the answer is not what you might expect. The river has more agency than the dam, not less. The dam is a fixed structure. The dam does not have options. The dam can only do what it was built to do. The river is constantly responding to the landscape, constantly adjusting, constantly making micro-decisions about how to flow. The river is not passive. The river is, in fact, more active than the dam, because the river is in constant motion, while the dam is just standing there. The illusion of agency that the trying self carries is the illusion that, by trying hard enough, you can override the conditions of your life, that you can force outcomes that are not aligned with the underlying movement, that you can make things happen that are not, in some deeper sense, already happening. This illusion costs a lot. It costs the energy of the constant trying. It costs the disappointment of the constant failure to override. It costs the relationship to the grain of your own life, which is overridden, again and again, in favor of the trying self's plan. True agency is something different. True agency is the capacity to feel what is moving and to participate in the movement intelligently. True agency is the capacity to say yes to what is calling and no to what is not. True agency is the capacity to act when action is appropriate and to rest when rest is appropriate, without having to consult an external rule to know which is which. True agency lives in the body, not in the strategy. True agency is what becomes available when the trying self softens enough that the deeper intelligence can speak. You are not losing power by softening the trying. You are gaining a different kind of power, a power that is closer to what power actually is, which is not the ability to force, but the ability to move with what is real, in ways that produce results that force could never produce. There is a kind of person in the world who has always had this kind of power, and you have probably noticed them in your life with some confusion. The people who do not seem to try, and yet things happen for them. The people who are not particularly aggressive, and yet doors open. The people who are not loud, and yet they are heard. You may have wondered, with some resentment, how they manage this. The answer is that they are operating from the third frequency, the frequency of the river, either by accident of upbringing or by the work of becoming. They are not signaling lack. They are not signaling waiting. They are simply moving, and the field responds to them as available, and so the responses come. These people are not better than you. They are not more deserving. They are simply operating from a frequency that the field reads as available. And that frequency is available to you, too. It is not a permanent gift given to a few. It is a state that any nervous system can settle into over time when the conditions that produce the closure are met with the patient work of softening. I want to be honest with you about something, because honesty is part of how this work proceeds. There will be moments in the work where you will feel like nothing is changing. There will be weeks where you do the noticing and notice nothing. There will be periods of doubt. There will be times when the old pattern returns with full force, and you will be convinced that everything you have been learning is wrong, that the trying self was right all along, that the work has not done anything. These periods are not failures. These periods are part of how the work proceeds. The receiving layer does not soften in a straight line. It softens in waves. It opens a little, then closes again, then opens a little more, then closes again. Each cycle of opening and closing is part of how the layer learns. The closing is not a setback. The closing is the layer rehearsing what it knows how to do in the context of an observer who is now seeing the rehearsal. The seeing changes the rehearsal, even when the rehearsal still happens. So be patient with the closings. Be patient with the moments when you feel like you have lost ground. Be patient with the days when the small fist arrives again, even though you thought you had moved past it. Be patient with the deflections that still happen, even after years of work. The patience is part of the practice. The patience is part of what the receiving layer is being taught. It is being taught that the observer is not going anywhere. It is being taught that the closure is allowed, that the closing will not be punished, that the observer will still be there when the closure releases again, with kindness, ready to witness whatever comes next. This is, in some sense, the deepest form of trust the work asks for. Not trust in the universe. Not trust in abundance. Trust in your own capacity to keep witnessing, even when the witnessing seems to produce no visible result. Trust that the witnessing is the work, and that the work is being done, even when the visible signs are absent for a stretch. The visible signs will come. They will come on a timeline that you do not predict. They will come in forms that you do not predict. They will come, often, when you have stopped looking for them, because the looking itself is a function of the trying self, and the trying self has to soften before the signs can come through. The relaxation of the looking is part of how the signs become available. This is not magical thinking. This is how a frequency-based system actually operates. The frequency has to be present for the signs to land. The looking is the wrong frequency. So let the looking soften. Do the work. Trust the slow process. Notice the half seconds. Witness the closures with kindness. Let the rooms open at their own pace. Let the inner ledger update with the slow accumulation of new evidence, and allow the visible signs, when they come, to be evidence of something that was already happening underneath, not the beginning of something new. The work is already happening. It started in some small way during this audio. Something in you opened that had been closed. Something in you recognized that had been forgotten. The recognition is not the same as the change, but the recognition is the beginning of the change. The change unfolds from here. It unfolds in the small moments of the coming weeks. It unfolds in the conversations you will have. It unfolds in the decisions you will make from a slightly different place than you would have made them from before. It unfolds, and it does not announce itself, and you may not notice for a while that it is unfolding, but it is unfolding. This audio is not the end of anything. This audio is not the answer. This audio is one piece of attention, applied carefully for a few hours to something that has been operating in you for a long time. The attention, by itself, changes something. The attention is the seed of the work. The work continues in your life without any further audio being required. You have the receiving layer. You have the inner ledger. You have the half second. You have the witnessing. These are not external instruments. These are capacities that live in you, that have always lived in you, that the audio has only named and made visible. You do not need this audio again, in the sense that the work does not require repeated listening. You may listen again if it is useful. You may not. The work is in your hands now. Or, more accurately, the work is in your half second now. The half second between the stimulus and the response, where the receiving layer lives, where the structure becomes visible, where the witnessing can be applied. That half second is yours. That half second has always been yours. The work that follows from finding it is the work that will unfold the river. Come back, for a moment, to the small fist in the chest, the one that arrives before the number. I want you to understand something about that fist, because we have named it as a symptom, but we have not yet named it as a messenger. The fist is not your enemy. The fist is not a flaw in your nervous system. The fist is a small, dedicated, patient guardian that decided, at some point in your early life, that its job was to brace before something hurt. It saw, in the household it grew up in, that money was followed by tension. It saw that mention of the bills was followed by a shift in the air. It saw, perhaps, that the arrival of a paycheck was followed by the relief that was so brief it barely registered, and then the slow tightening as the paycheck was distributed, allocated, eaten away. The fist saw all of this in the years when it was learning what to do, and it concluded that the safest posture was the bracing one. Brace first. Look second. By the time the number arrives, the bracing has already happened, and so the impact, if there is impact, lands on a body that was prepared. The fist has been doing this for you, faithfully, for decades. Every time you have opened the app, every time you have checked the balance, every time the message about the figure has arrived, the fist has done its work, and the work has been protective in the only way the fist knew how to be protective. The fist does not deserve to be punished for this. The fist does not deserve to be argued with. The fist deserves something gentler. The fist deserves to be told, slowly, that the conditions have changed. And this is part of what the receiving layer needs to learn. It is not a piece of information. The receiving layer does not respond to information. The receiving layer responds to repeated experience. The receiving layer is a slow learner, in the sense that no amount of telling it once will change what it does. It needs to feel, over and over, in small ordinary moments, that opening did not result in harm, that receiving was not punished, that the gift, the compliment, the favor, the rest, the ease was allowed to land and nothing terrible followed. This is why the half-second observation matters. Not because the observation, by itself, changes anything, but because the observation, repeated over weeks and months, gives the receiving layer a new dataset. The old dataset said receiving costs more than giving. The new dataset, slowly built, says receiving did not, this time, cost more. And then another receiving did not cost more. And then another. And the receiving layer, which is not stupid, begins to update its calculations. Not because you forced it to, because the evidence accumulated to a point where it could no longer ignore the new pattern. Let me say something now about time, because the question of time has been quietly running underneath this audio, and I want to address it before we move toward the close. Time, in the work of becoming the river, does not behave the way the trying self believes it does. The trying self believes that more time spent trying produces more result, that if you put in the hours, the outcome will follow, that the slow accumulation of effort is what produces, eventually, the breakthrough. This is the model of time the trying self carries everywhere it goes. The model says, time times effort equals result, and the higher you can drive the effort, the more the time produces. The work of becoming the river does not operate by this model. The work of becoming the river is not improved by more effort applied per unit of time. The work of becoming the river is improved by the relaxation of effort over time. The time spent in relaxed attention is, paradoxically, the time that produces the most. The time spent in intense striving is the time that produces the least, even when the striving is directed at exactly the thing you say you want. This is hard for the trying self to accept because the trying self has been rewarded in many other contexts for the model of effort times time. In school, in early career, in many of the visible measures of competence, the model of effort times time has produced results, and the trying self has been confirmed in its commitment to the model. The trying self brings the model to the work of becoming the river, applies it, and gets nothing in return. The trying self then concludes that the work of becoming the river is not real, or that it requires even more effort than the trying self has been applying. Both conclusions are wrong, but the trying self has no other model available. This is why the work of becoming the river often requires a kind of unlearning first. Before the new work can be done, the old model has to be set down. The setting down is not easy. The model is deeply embedded. The model is, in many cases, the reason you survived. The model produced enough results in enough contexts that it became the default way of relating to anything you wanted. Releasing the model, even partially, can feel like releasing a weapon you have used to defend yourself for a long time. The defense was real. The weapon worked, and the weapon will not work for this. The weapon, applied to the receiving layer, only tightens it further. So time, in this work, has a different shape. Time is not the accumulation of effort. Time is the slow exposure of the receiving layer to new experiences that update its calculations. The exposure happens in small moments. The moments are distributed across days, across weeks, across years. The accumulation is not visible in any one moment. The accumulation is only visible in retrospect, when you look back from a future point and notice that something has shifted. This is why the work asks for patience that is qualitatively different from the patience the trying self knows. The trying self's patience is endurance. The trying self's patience is holding on while waiting for the result. The trying self's patience is, fundamentally, still about the result. The river's patience is different. The river's patience is not waiting for anything. The river's patience is the texture of motion itself, when motion is not anxious about destination. The river moves, and the moving is enough, and the destination, when it arrives as a natural consequence of the motion, not as a reward for the patience. Try, if you can, to imagine what it would feel like to not be waiting for anything. Not because you have already gotten what you wanted, but because the wanting itself has softened to the point where the present moment is not deficient. This is the texture of the river. The present moment is not a holding pen for the future moment. The present moment is the actual location of the life. And in the actual location of the life, There is movement. There is breath. There is participation. There is the slow unfolding of what is, without the constant pressure of what should be. This sounds, to the trying mind, like resignation. It is not resignation. Resignation is the giving up of hope. The river is not resigned. The river is alive. The river is more alive than the dam ever was. The river has more relationship to what is happening than the trying self ever had. The trying self was always somewhere else, planning, strategizing, calculating. The river is here. The river is now. The river is in the actual texture of the actual day, and the actual day is more alive than the planning self ever knew it could be. This is one of the unexpected gifts of the work. The day itself becomes richer, not because the events of the day are more dramatic, because your presence to the events is more available. The same coffee in the morning tastes more like itself. The same walk to the store has more in it. The same conversation with a friend has more dimension. Not because anything has changed externally, because the system that was busy planning the next thing has softened it enough to actually be present to this thing. And this thing, when you are present to it, is more than you remembered it being. This is the abundance underneath the abundance, the wealth that is not measured in numbers, the richness of presence itself, which the trying self could not access because the trying self was always somewhere else. People who have never had much money sometimes have access to this richness because their trying self gave up trying for outer wealth and accidentally relaxed into presence. People who have had great outer wealth and no inner richness know what it is to be empty in the middle of plenty. The inner richness is its own kind of wealth, and it does not depend on the outer wealth. Although in the deepest version of this work, the inner richness and the outer wealth become aligned, because the same frequency that produces the inner richness also opens the membrane that lets the outer wealth flow. I want to say something about gratitude, because gratitude has been mentioned in this teaching tradition often, and you have probably tried gratitude practices, and they have probably not done what they were supposed to do. The reason gratitude practices often fail to produce results is that they are performed by the trying self in the trying frequency. The trying self lists things it is grateful for, the way it would list anything else, as a task to be completed. The list gets made. The list does not change anything. The list does not change anything because the frequency in which the list was made was the same frequency that was producing the lack the list was supposed to address. Real gratitude is not a list. Real gratitude is a state of receiving. Real gratitude is the experience of letting something land fully in the body without deflecting it. When you let the morning light land in your eyes without immediately moving on to the next thing. When you let the warmth of a cup of coffee land in your hands without checking your phone at the same time. When you let the sound of a familiar voice land in your ears without already planning your response. These are the moments of real gratitude. They are not productive of anything. They are not a strategy. They are the basic act of receiving what is here. And the receiving, by itself, is what real gratitude was always pointing at. If you want to do a gratitude practice that actually changes something, this is the practice. Not a list. A landing. Choose one ordinary thing in your day and let it land. The cup of coffee. The first deep breath. The sound of birds outside the window. The face of someone you love when they walk into the room. Let one thing, each day, actually arrive. Notice the half second before you deflect it, and let the thing land in that half second and stay landed for a few seconds longer than you usually allow. This is gratitude as a frequency, not as a content. The content does not matter. The frequency is everything, and the frequency is the frequency of the river, the frequency of letting something land, the frequency of openness, the frequency of receiving. There is one more thing I want to name before we come fully into the close, because it has been moving underneath this audio, and it deserves to be said directly. The work of becoming the river is not, ultimately, about money. It is not about abundance in the narrow sense. It is about the restoration of a capacity that was buried. And that capacity is the capacity to be alive in your own life. The money, the opportunity, the wealth, the visible markers of abundance, these are downstream of the restored capacity. They follow from it. But they are not what the work is for. The work is for the capacity itself. The work is for the return of a way of being that was forgotten, and that is more valuable than any number of dollars in any account. You have been trying to attract wealth. The wealth has been the language you have been using to describe what you actually wanted. What you actually wanted was the feeling of being alive in your life without bracing, the feeling of being present in your own existence without the constant low-grade vigilance, the feeling of not having to perform yourself in order to deserve being here. That is what you wanted. Wealth was the language for it because wealth was the closest you could get to naming it. But the wealth, by itself, would not have given you what you wanted. People who have a lot of wealth often do not have what you want. They have the markers without the substance. They have the numbers without the aliveness. And that is because the wealth, achieved through trying, comes with the same nervous system that was trying for it. The trying nervous system does not become the river just because the numbers got bigger. The trying nervous system continues to brace, regardless of the size of the account. The bracing is the dam. The dam holds, even at high outer wealth, if the dam has not been dismantled at its source. This is why the work of becoming the river, done in the right order, produces both the inner restoration and the outer alignment. The inner restoration is the receiving layer opening. The outer alignment is the visible life shifting to match. Doing the outer first, without the inner, produces wealth that does not feel like wealth because the receiving layer is still closed and cannot register what arrives. Doing the inner first with patience allows the outer to arrange itself in a way that is actually inhabitable when it arrives. So if there is a single piece of strategic counsel in this audio, it is this. Do not chase the outer. The outer cannot be chased successfully because the chasing closes the very layer that would receive the outer. Do the inner work. The inner work is the noticing, the witnessing, the half-second attention, the soft kind seeing of the closures as they happen. The inner work produces the inner restoration. The outer follows, on its own timeline, in its own form. And the outer that follows, when it arrives, is inhabitable. You can actually live in it. You can actually receive it. You can actually let it land. And that is the abundance that was being pointed at all along by every tradition that ever spoke of any of this. I want to give you another image because images carry better than concepts, and the work needs to live in images if it is going to survive the trip from the audio into your ordinary life. Imagine a garden. The garden has been neglected for a long time. The neglect was not negligence in the bad sense. The neglect happened because, for a long stretch, all of your attention was needed elsewhere. You had to survive. You had to make things work. You had to keep up. There was no extra attention to give the garden. And the garden, without attention, did what gardens do without attention. The weeds came up. The paths became overgrown. The flowers that were once tended became scarce. Some of the plants died. Some of them went dormant, waiting underground for conditions that might allow them to come back. When you finally have the attention to give to the garden, you cannot give it all at once. You cannot, in a single weekend, restore years of neglect. If you try, you will exhaust yourself. You will pull up things you should have left. You will plant things in the wrong places. You will, in your urgency to restore the garden, make mistakes that you would not have made if you had moved more slowly. The garden requires a particular pace. The garden requires that you do a little, then look, then do a little more, then look again. The garden requires that you let the garden tell you what it needs, instead of imposing what you think it needs. This is exactly what the work of becoming the river requires. The garden of your nervous system has been neglected, not by your fault, but by the conditions of your life. The weeds have grown. The paths are overgrown. Some of the original plants have gone dormant. The restoration cannot be done in a weekend. The restoration requires that you do a little, then look, then do a little more, then look again. The restoration requires that you let your own system tell you what it needs, instead of imposing what you think it needs. The doing little is the noticing. The looking is the witnessing. The patience between the doing and the looking is the trust. And the slow restoration is the river coming back, not because you forced it, but because you gave it the conditions in which it could. You may also find, in the work, that some of the dormant plants begin to come back. Capacities that you thought you had lost. Pleasures that you had forgotten you used to take. Curiosities that had gone quiet. Talents that had been put aside because they were not productive enough to justify in the trying economy. These dormant plants are still alive, under the soil, waiting for the conditions. As the conditions soften, they begin to send up shoots. You will be surprised by what comes back. You will be surprised by who you used to be before the dam was built, and by how much of that person is still available when the conditions allow. This is one of the deeper gifts of this work, and it is rarely mentioned because it cannot be promised. It is not the gift of abundance in the financial sense. It is the gift of meeting parts of yourself that you had forgotten existed. The version of you that knew how to play. The version of you that knew how to rest. The version of you that knew how to enjoy something without measuring it. The version of you that knew how to be quiet without being lonely. These versions are not lost. They are dormant. The work, slowly, allows them to come back. When they begin to come back, you may feel a kind of grief. A grief for the years they were not available. A grief for what was missed while they were dormant. This grief is healthy. The grief is part of how the system fully reopens. The grief is the recognition of the cost, and the recognition allows the cost to be set down. Without the grief, the cost stays carried indefinitely. With the grief, the cost can be acknowledged and released. Let the grief come when it comes. Do not push it away. Do not analyze it. Do not try to fix it. Just let it pass through, the way grief passes through when it is allowed. The grief is part of the river. The grief is part of what the dam was holding back. When the dam softens, the grief is one of the first things that moves through, because grief has been waiting longer than almost anything else for permission to move. After the grief, often, there is a quietness, a different kind of quietness than the trying self ever knew. The trying self's quietness was the temporary pause between efforts. River's quietness is the quietness of motion that does not need to advertise itself. The quietness of being present without needing to perform the presence. The quietness that is not the absence of activity, but the presence of activity that has no anxiety about itself. In this quietness, things become possible that were not possible before. Conversations that were too difficult to have become available. Decisions that were too complicated to make become clear. Relationships that were too tangled to address become legible. The quietness is not passive. The quietness is the condition in which clear seeing becomes available, and clear seeing makes possible what mudded seeing made impossible. You may discover, in this quietness, that some of the things you have been pursuing are not actually what you wanted. The pursuing was a way of staying busy. The pursuing was a way of avoiding the quietness. When the quietness becomes available, the pursuing becomes optional. And some of the pursuits, examined in the quietness, reveal themselves to be other than what you had told yourself they were. This is not a failure. This is clarity. You can release the pursuits that were not yours. You can keep the pursuits that are yours. The keeping and the releasing both become easier because the criterion is no longer about which pursuit will make you finally feel okay. The criterion is about which pursuit is actually aligned with the grain of your life. I want to speak, briefly, about other people, about the people in your life, about the relationships that have been shaped, often without your awareness, by the closure of the receiving layer. When the receiving layer is closed, intimacy is difficult. Intimacy requires receiving. Intimacy requires letting someone in. Intimacy requires the willingness to be affected by another person's care, attention, love. If the receiving layer is closed, intimacy gets routed through the giving channel. You become the one who cares for the other person, but you cannot let them care for you. You become the one who notices what they need, but you cannot let them notice what you need. The relationship is one-directional. Even when both people are good people, even when both people want it to be mutual, the mutuality requires the receiving layer, and the receiving layer is closed. This is why many people, after years of relationships that were one-directional, become lonely in ways that do not respond to having more people around. The loneliness is not the absence of people. The loneliness is the absence of receiving. The loneliness is what happens when the closed receiving layer cannot let in what the people around you are offering. They are offering. The layer is closing. The offering does not land. The loneliness, in the middle of plenty, persists. When the receiving layer begins to open, the relationships shift. Some of them deepen. The people who were trying to give you something all along find that their giving suddenly lands. They feel met in a way they had not felt met before. They may not be able to articulate what changed. They will just experience, in the relationship, a new dimension that was not there before. This dimension is the mutuality that becomes possible when the receiving layer is no longer welded shut. Other relationships may not survive the shift. Some relationships were organized around your closure. They needed the closure to maintain the dynamic. When the closure softens, the dynamic does not work anymore, and the relationship either reorganizes or it ends. The ending of these relationships is not a failure of the work. It is the natural consequence of the work. The relationships that depended on your being closed cannot continue when you are no longer closed. They were not bad people. They were positioned in the only position they knew how to be in, and the position required your closure. When your closure softened, the position became untenable, and the relationship had to find a new shape or to dissolve. This is sometimes painful. You will lose some people. The losses are real. The grief over the losses is part of the work, as I said earlier. But the people who remain and the new people who arrive will be people whose own receiving layers are open enough to be in relationship with yours. And these relationships are different from anything you have known before. They are the relationships where receiving and giving move both ways, where the love does not require performance, where the connection does not depend on either party being closed in order to be safe. This kind of relationship is rare in the world that has been built. Most relationships in the dominant culture are organized around mutual closure. Mutual closure is presented as normal. The mutual closure is mistaken for safety, for stability, for adulthood. But mutual closure is just two people whose receiving layers cannot let each other in, performing care without the substance of care, exchanging gestures that do not land. This is what most people have, and this is why most people, even in long relationships, often feel a low-grade loneliness that they cannot name. The loneliness is the mutual closure. The closure is what they thought relationship was supposed to look like. Becoming the river, in the relational sense, means becoming someone who can let another person actually in. This is harder than it sounds. The opening is risky. The opening requires you to allow another person to affect you, to influence you, to land in your interior. The opening requires the willingness to be changed by what the other person brings. This is the kind of intimacy that most people have only experienced briefly, in moments, and then closed back up against. Real ongoing intimacy is the river's relationship to whatever it flows through. The river is not unchanged by what it flows through. The river is shaped by the landscape, and the landscape is shaped by the river. Both are altered by the contact. Both are part of the same flowing reality. You may find, as the work proceeds, that you start to want this kind of relationship. You may find that the relationships you had been accepting as enough suddenly are not enough. This is not entitlement. This is recognition. The receiving layer, opening, is recognizing what real receiving feels like and is becoming less willing to settle for the simulation of receiving that the mutual closure offered. You may have to renegotiate some of your existing relationships. You may have to seek out new ones. You may have to be patient for a while with a smaller circle of real intimacy than you used to have of pretend intimacy. The smaller circle is, in every dimension that matters, more nourishing than the larger one was. There is one more theme I want to bring into this audio, because it has been moving underneath everything we have said, and it deserves to be named directly. The work of becoming the river is, in some sense, the work of forgiveness. Not the forgiveness that the trying self performs as another task. The forgiveness that emerges, naturally, as the closures soften. Forgiveness of the people who built the dam. Forgiveness of the conditions that required the closure. Forgiveness of yourself for spending so many years in the dam, not knowing there was another way. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not a decision. Forgiveness is a consequence. You do not decide to forgive. You do the work of softening the closures, and the forgiveness arises, in its own time, as a natural result of the softening. The grievances that you carried, the resentments, the unprocessed anger at the people who shaped your closure, these do not go away because you decide they should. They soften because the system that needed them softens. The grievances were part of the closure. The grievances were how the closure justified itself. When the closure relaxes, the grievances lose their purpose and they begin to dissolve without your intervention. This is one of the most surprising experiences of the work. You will find, one day, that you no longer have the same charge around a memory that used to charge you. You will think about a person who hurt you, and you will notice that the charge has reduced. You did not work on the charge. You did not affirm forgiveness. You did not pray it away. You just kept doing the patient work of softening the closures, and the charge softened with everything else because the charge was part of the same system. This is, in some traditions, what was meant by grace. The arrival of something you did not earn, in a form you did not arrange, as a consequence of doing a different work than the work that would have tried to produce it. Grace is not granted by a higher being who decides to bestow it. Grace is what becomes available when the system that was blocking it softens. The system was the dam. The grace was the river. The river was always there. The grace was always available. The dam was what made the grace appear absent. And the softening of the dam is what makes the grace appear, again, as if for the first time, although it was here the whole time. You are not going to be able to hold all of this. That is fine. The audio is not asking you to hold it. The audio is asking you to let some of it land, and to trust that what lands will be enough. The receiving layer cannot be lectured. The receiving layer learns through experience. The experiences that this audio has given you, the small openings, the small recognitions, the moments where something in your body responded to a sentence in a way it did not respond to a previous sentence, those experiences are now part of your data set. They are working in you, even after the audio ends. They will continue to work in you in the coming days, in ways you may not consciously track. You do not have to memorize anything. You do not have to take notes. You do not have to listen again unless you want to. The work will continue, whether or not you do anything else. The half-second is now visible to you in a way it was not before, and the half-second will keep being visible, and the visibility itself is the engine of the change. You do not have to drive the engine. The engine is running. The engine is the witness in you, which is now awake in a way it was sleeping before. The witness is the part of you that does not have to do anything. The witness is what was there before the trying self was constructed, and what will be there after the trying self softens. The witness is the consciousness that has been watching everything, all along, without ever needing to intervene. The witness does not act. The witness does not strategize. The witness does not produce. The witness only sees. And the seeing is what was always going to be the medicine, if you could find your way to it. You have found your way to it, at least a little, in the last hours. You have located the witness. You have practiced, in small moments, the act of seeing without doing. The witness is now activated in a way that, going forward, will be available to you in moments that the trying self used to dominate. When the small fist forms before the bank app, the witness will be there. When the deflection happens after the compliment, the witness will be there. When the impulse to overpay arises after the favor is accepted, the witness will be there. The witness does not always change the response in the moment, but the witness sees the response, and the seeing, over time, is what allows the response to change. You have, now, what you need. You have the names. You have the images. You have the half-second. You have the trust that the work proceeds. You have the trust that the work proceeds even when nothing visible is happening. This is what the audio came to give you. This is the package. There is no upgrade, no advanced version, no more elaborate teaching that would make this work better. The work is already complete in the sense that you have everything required. The unfolding is now in your life. The unfolding is the actual work. The audio was the doorway. You are now through the doorway. The work happens on the other side. Before we come fully into the close, I want to spend a final stretch on something that has been visibly at the edges of this whole conversation, but has not been brought to the center. It is the question of what it means to actually let yourself be wealthy. Not in the cartoon sense of wealth, in the actual sense. In the body, in the day, in the texture of an ordinary Tuesday. Most people who say they want wealth have not actually examined what it would mean for their nervous system to have it. They have examined the surface picture, the car, the house, the freedom from certain anxieties, the vacations, the being able to say yes to things. These are real desires. These are not silly desires. But underneath these desires is a question that most people do not look at, which is the question of what it would feel like to occupy that life, to wake up in that life, to sit in that life when nothing is happening, to handle the small, ordinary inconveniences of that life, to be the person who is allowed to have that life. This last one is where most of the work actually is, being the person who is allowed to have that life. The inner ledger, as we said, has a calculation about what is allowed. The calculation is rigid because it was set by a child. When the outer life exceeds what the inner ledger considers allowed, the ledger goes to work, in the ways we described, to bring things back into alignment. This is mechanical. This is not personal. The ledger is not against you. The ledger is just doing what it was set up to do. The work of becoming the person who is allowed to have the life is the work of slowly updating the ledger. We have talked about this in general terms. Let me make it more specific. The updating happens in moments that are smaller than people think. The moments are not about money, directly. They are about the precursors to money. They are about the small ways you, in your daily life, demonstrate to yourself what you are allowed to have. Are you allowed to take the better seat at the restaurant, or do you take the worse one because someone might want the better one? Are you allowed to order what you actually want, or do you order what is acceptable? Are you allowed to leave the conversation when the conversation is done? Or do you stay because leaving might be rude? Are you allowed to take the credit for something you actually did, or do you deflect it to someone else? Are you allowed to enjoy something visibly, or do you tone down your enjoyment so as not to make others uncomfortable? These are not money questions, but they are the questions the ledger is keeping track of. The ledger is watching how much you are willing to claim in small things, and it is calibrating, on the basis of the small things, what you will be allowed to claim in the larger things. This is not because the universe is petty. This is because your own system is consistent. The system cannot let in at the level of money what it does not let in at the level of small daily claims. The two are connected. The small daily claims are the practice ground for the larger ones. If you cannot take the better seat at the restaurant, your system is not going to let you take the better job at the new company. If you cannot enjoy the compliment fully, your system is not going to let you enjoy the abundance fully. The capacities are linked. The smaller ones build the larger ones. So one of the most practical things you can do, in addition to the half-second observation, is to start practicing small claims. Not aggressive claims. Not entitled claims. Small, calibrated, real claims. The seat you actually prefer. The food you actually want. The expression of opinion that you actually have. The hour of rest that you actually need. The compliment that you actually receive without diminishing. These small claims are the curriculum. The receiving layer is being asked to participate in low-stakes situations, in the act of having what is wanted. And as the receiving layer practices, in low stakes, the larger claims become available because the system has been trained. This is one of the gentle paradoxes of this work. The path to large abundance runs through small allowances. The path to having more money runs through having more of what is yours in the small daily textures. The system does not jump levels. The system grows continuously. And the growth happens in the smaller, more frequent moments, not in the rarer, larger ones. Pay attention this week to one small claim per day. One thing you actually want that you would normally not allow yourself and that you give yourself permission for. Not in a way that harms anyone. Not in a way that is showy or aggressive. Just in a small way, a real way that updates the ledger. Over a year, that is 365 small updates. The ledger will notice. The ledger will recalibrate. The recalibration will, eventually, show up at the level of larger allowances. I want to talk, also, about envy. Because envy has been moving in you, probably in the years of trying. And envy is one of the most important diagnostic signals available to the work, if you can hold it correctly. Envy is what happens when you see, in another person, something that you, at some level, believe you cannot have. Envy is not the desire for the thing. Envy is the desire for the thing combined with the belief that it is not available to you. The belief is what produces the sting. The desire by itself, without the belief, is just interest, just wanting, just inspiration. The sting of envy is the moment the desire meets the belief that the desire cannot be fulfilled in you. This makes envy useful if you can hold it without shame. Envy points, with precision, at the places where the ledger says no. Every flash of envy is a piece of information. The ledger said no to this thing, in this form, for me. The information is precise. The information is the doorway into the work, because the work, in part, is the rewriting of the ledger in the places where the no has been operating. So when envy arises, do not push it away. Do not be ashamed of it. Do not lecture yourself about how you should be happy for the person. The lecturing does not work. The lecturing is the trying self trying to fix the envy with effort, and the effort makes the envy go underground without changing the underlying belief. Instead, let the envy be visively. See it. Name what specifically you envy. And then, with kindness, ask yourself what the belief is underneath the envy. The belief is what closes the ledger. The belief is what the work, slowly, is rewriting. Envy, used this way, becomes a map of the work that remains. Each envy points at a place where the closure is still active. You are not bad for having the envy. The envy is just the closure becoming visibly in a moment of contact with someone whose closure is not in the same place yours is. Their openness in that area is contrast for your closure in that area. The contrast makes the closure feel like a sting. The sting is information. The information is the gift of the contact. I want to talk about money one more time, because money has been a thread through this whole audio, and I want to honor it directly. Money is not what most people think it is. Money is not primarily a thing. Money is a frequency that has been collectively agreed upon. Money is a representation of value, and value is ultimately energetic. The pieces of paper, the numbers in the account, these are tokens of the underlying frequency. The frequency is the substance. The tokens are the surface. This means that your relationship to money is primarily a relationship to a frequency. And the frequency responds to you the way frequencies do on the basis of the signal you send. The signal of pursuit produces pursuit dynamics. The signal of waiting produces waiting dynamics. The signal of the river produces river dynamics. The money does not respond to your effort. The money responds to your frequency. And the frequency is the thing that has been the focus of this entire audio. When your frequency shifts, your relationship to money shifts. Not because you summoned a different amount of money, because the money you encounter starts behaving differently. The same dollar in your account feels different. The same opportunity that comes into your inbox feels different. The same conversation about money with a partner or a colleague or a family member feels different. The difference is not in the money. The difference is in the frequency through which the money is being received. And the frequency through which the money is being received determines, in ways that are slow and patient and reliable, what kinds of money find their way to you. This is why the work is, ultimately, about the receiving layer and not about any external strategy. The receiving layer is the frequency through which everything else passes. When the receiving layer is closed, abundance approaches and is deflected. When the receiving layer is open, abundance approaches and lands. The deflection and the landing are not a question of luck. They are a function of the layer. And the layer is, slowly, what the work changes. A final image, before we come into the close. Imagine a body of water, much larger than a river. Imagine the ocean. The ocean is what the river is moving toward, although the river does not think of it that way. The ocean is, in some sense, what the river already is, expressed at a different scale. The river does not decide to reach the ocean. The river simply moves with its grain, and the grain leads to the ocean, because the grain of all rivers leads to the ocean. The reaching is automatic, because the grain is honest. You are a river. The abundance you have been calling toward you is the ocean. The reaching is not what is required. The grain is what is required. Following your own grain with patient attention lets the river do what rivers do. The ocean is not somewhere else in this image. The ocean is the larger reality of which the river is already a part. The arrival at the ocean is not, finally, an event. It is a recognition. The river was always ocean. The river was just ocean in a particular shape, moving through a particular landscape. And when the recognition completes, the river does not stop being a river. The river just understands itself, finally, as also ocean, the way it has been all along. I want to slow down here, near the end, and speak to one more thing, because there is a question that the more honest part of you may have been holding, quietly, throughout this entire audio. The question is whether this is actually going to work. Whether, when you finish this audio and resume your life tomorrow, anything will actually be different. Whether the language you have been receiving for the last few hours is going to translate into the substance of an ordinary Wednesday. I will not lie to you about this. The honest answer is that some of what we have named will translate, and some of it will not. And the part that does not translate will not be because you failed. It will be because the work proceeds in waves, and not all of the waves arrive immediately, and the visible changes are downstream of changes that take time to build up underneath. What I can tell you, with confidence, is that something has already shifted. The shift is small. The shift may not be measurable in any external way, But the shift is real. You have, in the course of this audio, located the witness. You have, in moments, felt the witness see something it had not seen before. The witness, once located, does not go back to being unlocated. The witness will be there tomorrow when something familiar happens. The witness will be there next week when an old pattern reasserts itself. The witness will be there in a year when you have forgotten most of the specific phrases from this audio and only the general feeling remains. The witness is now an active capacity. The active capacity is what was not active before. That is enough, truly. That is the foundation. Everything else follows from it. The half-second observation, the kind seeing of the closures, the small claims practiced over time, the grief that allows itself to move, the grain that becomes more audible, the relationships that reorganize, the inner ledger that, slowly, gets new entries. All of this proceeds from the witness being awake, and the witness is awake. You did that, not by trying, just by listening with attention to language that named what was already in you and letting the language do its work of waking what was sleeping. The waking is the gift of this audio. The waking is what was not in the room when you pressed play. The waking is what is in the room now, and the waking will continue to do its work in you, regardless of what you do next, because the waking does not depend on a practice or a discipline or a continued effort. The waking is. Once a present, it remains. The witness does not go back to sleep. You will be tested. Tomorrow, or the day after, or next week, something will happen that will feel like a return to the old pattern, a financial setback, a disappointment, a small daily moment that pulls you back into the bracing, the deflecting, the closing. This will happen. It is not a failure of the work. It is the system doing what the system does. The system has not been updated by this audio. The system has only been seen. The seeing is what allows the system to update over time through the accumulated evidence of being seen. When the test comes, do not despair. Do not conclude that the audio did not work. Do not conclude that the work is not for you. Just notice. Notice the closure. Notice the bracing. Notice the deflection. The noticing is the practice. The noticing does not require you to feel any particular way about what is being noticed. The noticing is allowed to coexist with the closure. In fact, the noticing must coexist with the closure, because if you tried to notice only when the closure was absent, you would never get to notice anything useful. The closure is where the witness has its work. The closure is what the witness is here to see. Over time, with enough noticing, the closures begin to soften. This is not a promise about a specific timeline. This is a statement about what the work does. The closures, witnessed kindly, repeatedly, with no demand that they change, do, in fact, change. Not because they were forced to, because the conditions in which they were being maintained have shifted. The witness's continued presence, without judgment, is one of those conditions. The receiving of small experiences of safety, when receiving was previously punished, is another. The accumulation of these conditions, over months and years, produces a softening that the system itself initiates without your effort when it has accumulated enough evidence that the new conditions are reliable. You do not have to track the progress. The tracking is the trying self's attempt to manage what cannot be managed. The progress happens whether you track it or not. If you find yourself tracking, that is fine. Just notice the tracking and let the tracking soften too. Even the tracking is something the witness can hold. Even the wanting to know if the work is working is something that can be witnessed with kindness as another expression of the trying self trying to be sure. Eventually, you will look back, and you will notice that you are not where you were. The noticing of the change will not be on the day the change happened. The noticing will be retrospective. You will be in some ordinary moment, doing some ordinary thing, and you will realize that the way you are doing the ordinary thing is different from how you used to do it. The chest is not tight. The deflection did not happen. The pre-calculation of depth did not run. The half second was occupied by something other than the old reflex. And you will realize, with surprise, that the change must have happened gradually because there was no single moment of breakthrough you can point to. This is how this work proceeds. Without breakthroughs, with slow accumulations, with retrospective recognitions. The trying self does not like this. The trying self wants the breakthrough, the moment, the marker. The river does not produce markers. The river just moves. And the moving is the change, and the change is visible, eventually, in the same way that a canyon is visible, as the cumulative effect of an enormous amount of patient flowing that no individual day could have measured. You are now in the slow accumulation. You were before, too, although you did not know it. The audio has only made the accumulation visibly. The accumulation continues, in your life, whether or not anyone names it. The river moves. The river has been moving. The river will continue to move, and the dam will continue to soften, and the receiving layer will continue to update, and the inner ledger will continue to revise its entries, and the visible life will continue to reorganize. And all of this proceeds without your direct intervention, because all of this proceeds from a place that is deeper than intervention. Your job, from here, is not to intervene. Your job is to witness, with kindness, what continues to happen. Your job is to take the small claims that present themselves. Your job is to let, when you can, the gifts land. Your job is to grieve when grief arrives. Your job is to follow the grain when the grain becomes audible. Your job is to trust the slow process, even when you cannot see the result. Your job is to be the awake witness in your own life, and to let the witness do its quiet work, day after day, without demanding that the work produce visible signs on any particular timeline. This is a different kind of job than the trying self was given. The trying self was given the job of producing. The witness is given the job of seeing. Producing exhausts. Seeing nourishes. The witness can do its work for a lifetime without getting tired, because the witness is not exerting effort. The witness is simply being present. And being present is the natural state of consciousness when the trying that obscures it softens. So let me say it one more time, because the saying it again is part of how it lands. The work has been done. Not all of the work. But the part of the work that this audio was for has been done. You have located the witness. You have understood, in your body, what the trying was costing. You have felt, at least briefly, the relief of recognizing that the trying was the leak. You have been given names for what was operating underneath. You have been given images that will continue to do their slow work in you. You have been given a practice, the half-second observation, that you can take into the next ordinary day. This is what you came for. This is what was waiting. The rest is yours to live. Notice what happened to your shoulders in the last hour. Notice what happened to the tightness in the chest that was there when you pressed play. You have been ocean, all along, in the shape of a particular life moving through a particular landscape. The dam was what was keeping the recognition from completing. The dam was holding you in a particular relationship to your own larger nature. As the dam softens, the recognition becomes more available. Not as a thought, as a felt sense. The felt sense that you are not separate from what you have been calling toward, that you are part of the same substance, that the substance has been flowing through you and as you the whole time, even when the closure made it seem like you were on the outside of it. This is what the title was pointing at. Becoming the river is not, finally, becoming something new. It is recognizing what you have been all along and dropping the structure that was preventing the recognition. The river was already here. You were just standing in it, in a posture that made it feel like you were standing next to it. The posture was the dam. The recognition is the river. The river is what you already are. Notice what happened to your shoulders in the last hour. Notice what happened to the tightness in the chest that was there when you pressed play. The one that arrives before the number. I want you to understand something about that fist, because we have named it as a symptom, but we have not yet named it as a messenger. The fist is not your enemy. The fist is not a flaw in your nervous system. Fist is a small, dedicated, patient guardian that decided, at some point in your early life, that its job was to brace before something hurt. It saw, in the household it grew up in, that money was followed by tension. It saw that mention of the bills was followed by a shift in the air. It saw, perhaps, that the arrival of a paycheck was followed by the relief that was so brief it barely registered, and then the slow tightening as the paycheck was distributed, allocated, eaten away. The fist saw all of this in the years when it was learning what to do, and it concluded that the safest posture was the bracing one. Brace first. Look second. By the time the number arrives, the bracing has already happened, and so the impact, if there is impact, lands on a body that was prepared. The fist has been doing this for you, faithfully, for decades. Every time you have opened the app, every time you have checked the balance, every time the message about the figure has arrived, the fist has done its work, and the work has been protective in the only way the fist knew how to be protective. The fist does not deserve to be punished for this. The fist does not deserve to be argued with. The fist deserves something gentler. The fist deserves to be told, slowly, that the conditions have changed. And this is part of what the receiving layer needs to learn. It is not a piece of information. The receiving layer does not respond to information. The receiving layer responds to repeated experience. The receiving layer is a slow learner, in the sense that no amount of telling it once will change what it does. It needs to feel, over and over, in small, ordinary moments, that opening did not result in harm, that receiving was not punished, that the gift, the compliment, the favor, the rest, the ease, was allowed to land and nothing terrible followed. This is why the half-second observation matters. Not because the observation, by itself, changes anything, but because the observation, repeated over weeks and months, gives the receiving layer a new data set. The old data set said receiving costs more than giving. The new data set, slowly built, says receiving did not, this time, cost more. And then another receiving did not cost more. And then another. And the receiving layer, which is not stupid, begins to update its calculations, not because you forced it to, because the evidence accumulated to a point where it could no longer ignore the new pattern. Let me give you another concrete picture, because we have been working at the level of structure for a long time, and the body needs to drop back into specifics. There is a woman who, for years, has been the one in her friend group who pays for things. She is not the wealthiest. She is not even close to the wealthiest. But she is the one who picks up the check. She is the one who covers the shortfall when the group is splitting an expense. She is the one who, when a friend mentions a difficult month, kitly sends some money without being asked. She has been this person for a long time. The role is comfortable. The role gives her a particular kind of self-respect. And then, one ordinary evening, at a dinner with 3 close friends, the check arrives. And one of the friends, a friend who has done well in the last few years, reaches for the check and says, "This one is on me." The woman, almost automatically, says, "Oh, no, let me," or "Are you sure?" or "Let's split it." The friend says, "No, really, I want to." And the woman's body, in that moment, does something specific. There is a small refusal. There is a tightening in the chest. There is a sense of disorientation. The woman, who is the one who pays, is being asked to be the one who receives, and the role does not fit. She accepts the gesture, because to keep refusing would be rude, but her body does not accept it. Her body sits through the rest of the dinner with a small unease that she cannot quite name. She wakes up the next morning, still vaguely uncomfortable. She finds, by the end of the week, that she has overpaid for something else to balance the books. A larger tip than the meal warranted. A larger gift than the occasion called for. The inner ledger went to work. The accepting was not allowed to stay accepted. This is how the inner economy operates in real life. Not in dramatic gestures. In small, unsettled feelings that prompt small balancing actions that go unnoticed by the conscious mind but are tracked, faithfully, by a system that has not yet been told the conditions have changed. And now, imagine that same woman 2 years later, after she has done some of this work, after she has begun to notice the half-second. The same scenario unfolds. The friend reaches for the check. The friend says, "This one is on me." The woman feels the same impulse to refuse. But this time, she notices the impulse. She sees it. She sees the small fist begin to form, and she sees that the small fist is offering its protection, and she silently thanks the small fist for its loyalty, and she lets the gesture land anyway. She says, "Thank you." That is all. She does not balance it later. She does not overpay for something else. She lets it stay received. And something in the inner ledger, very quietly, makes a small adjustment. Not a dramatic one, a small one. The ledger learned, in that moment, that receiving did not have to be balanced. The ledger learned that the role of payer was not the only role available. The ledger filed this experience and stored it, and the next time a similar moment arrives, the threshold of resistance will be a little lower. Not because she forced it lower, because the new dataset is being built, one observed moment at a time. This is the actual mechanism of change. Not dramatic, not loud, not measurable in a single week, but operating underneath in the patient way that real change operates. The dam does not come down because you push it. The dam comes down because stone by stone, the receiving layer learns that the stones were not necessary, and the stones loosen by themselves, and one day a stone falls, and the falling is not announced, and the falling is not visible to anyone but you, and the next day another stone, and the next month another, and the year after that, the river is moving more freely than it has in your lifetime, and you cannot point to the moment it changed, because it did not change in a moment. There is a kind of patience this requires that the trying mind does not know how to do. The trying mind wants the change to be quick. The trying mind wants the breakthrough, the moment, the confirmation. The trying mind, having learned the structure of effort, wants to apply the structure of effort even to the work of becoming the river. And every time the trying mind tries to apply effort to becoming the river, it builds the dam back up, because effort is the dam. The dam is built out of effort. You cannot effort your way to the river. You can only notice, over and over, where the effort is occurring, and let the noticing soften it. This is why the work of becoming the river is sometimes described as the easiest work and sometimes described as the hardest work, and both descriptions are true. It is easy because it does not require you to do anything new. It does not require you to add a practice, a discipline, a routine. It does not require you to become a different person. It is hard because it requires you to not do the things you have spent your life learning to do. It requires you to stop, in small moments, the very gestures that have felt like your competence. It requires you to allow, where you have been trained to provide. It requires you to receive, where you have been honored for giving. And these are not small. The identity built on the giving is real. The identity built on the providing is real. And the work asks that identity to soften, not to be destroyed, just to soften enough that the other identity, the one that can receive, can also exist. You may notice, as you do this work, that some of the people in your life become uncomfortable. This is worth saying directly. The relationships in your life, many of them, have been organized around your role as the one who pays, the one who provides, the one who absorbs. When that role begins to shift, The people who were positioned in relation to that role will feel the shift, and some of them will not welcome it. They will not say out loud that they preferred you in the old position. They will not be conscious of preferring it, but they will react in small ways to your changes. They will offer less. They will become slightly cooler. They will, in some cases, drift. This is not a failure of the work. This is evidence that the work is happening. The shifts in your inner economy do not stay inner. The shifts ripple outward, and the outer arrangements that were dependent on the old inner economy must reconfigure, and some of those reconfigurations will be uncomfortable. Some people in your life will, on the other hand, rise to meet the new frequency. They will sense the change without naming it, and they will respond in kind. Their offers will increase. Their generosity will become more visibly. Their availability will deepen. These are the people whose own receiving layers are open enough to recognize and welcome the opening of yours. They were always there. You may not have noticed them because the system that was closed could not register their openness. As yours opens, theirs becomes visibly, and the relational field around you reorganizes in a direction you could not have predicted. This is one of the strangest and most reliable signs of the work. The cast of characters in your life begins to change. Not because you went out and recruited new people, because the frequency you are broadcasting is no longer matched by the same people it used to be matched by, and the field around you, with the same patient honesty that runs everything else, brings forward the matches for the new frequency. Let me say something now about money specifically, because we have been speaking in general terms about abundance, and the listener who is most likely to be sitting with this audio has, at the back of their mind, a specific question about money. Will any of this affect the actual numbers in the actual account? The honest answer is that it will, and slowly, and not in the way you imagine. The outer economy follows the inner economy. This is not a guarantee that exists outside of time. The outer economy follows the inner economy on the timeline that the outer economy has, which is the timeline of contracts and jobs and clients and businesses and decisions made by other people in their own slow rhythms. You cannot speed up the outer timeline by demanding it. You can only set the inner conditions and let the outer rearrange itself in its own time. What you will likely notice in the first months of this work is not more money. What you will notice is that the same amount of money feels different. The relationship to it changes. The tightness in the chest before the bank app becomes inconsistent, then less frequent. The sense that the money is about to slip away begins to soften. The preemptive scarcity that used to color every purchase begins to lift in small moments. You may find yourself spending differently. Not more, not less, just differently. The decisions about money begin to come from a less defended place. You are no longer fighting with every transaction. This is the early phase. The numbers themselves have not yet changed, but the experience of the numbers has begun to shift, and the shift is real, and the shift is what allows the next phase to happen. In the next phase, opportunities begin to behave differently. You will notice that an opportunity comes toward you, and your first impulse is not to reach for it with a tight hand. Your first impulse is to feel in your body whether the opportunity is actually yours. This is a new capacity. The pre-trine mind would have grabbed any opportunity that came near because the pre-trine mind was operating from lack, and any opportunity was better than no opportunity. The river mind can feel the difference between an opportunity that resonates and an opportunity that does not. The river mind can pass on what is not aligned without anxiety, because the river mind is not afraid that nothing else will come. The river is not afraid of running out. The river knows itself as constantly replenished. In this phase, you may say no to things you would have said yes to before, and you may say yes to things you would have said no to before. The criteria has changed. The criteria is no longer how do I get this. The criteria is, does this match what I am moving as? And the answer to that question, when you can feel it, is faster and clearer than the answer to the old question ever was. The third phase, which comes later still, is when the outer economy begins to reorganize visibly. Income shifts. Not always upward in a linear way. Sometimes the shift is sideways, into different sources. Sometimes the shift is downward briefly, as old structures that were not aligned with the new frequency fall away. Sometimes the shift is upward, but in unexpected places, from sources that you would not have predicted. The outer reorganization is not always pleasant. It can be disorienting. Things you had counted on may disappear, and things you had not seen coming may arrive. This is the abundance membrane reorganizing what it lets through. The membrane is responding to your new broadcast. The response is not always what you would have asked for in the old broadcast. This is why the work of becoming the river requires a certain trust. And the trust is not a belief that you have to manufacture. The trust is something that grows slowly as you experience the responsiveness of the system. The first few times, the outer rearranges in response to the inner. You may not believe it is connected. By the 10th or the 15th time, the pattern becomes undeniable. The system is responsive. The system has been responsive the whole time. You were not seeing the responses because you were broadcasting from a frequency that produced one kind of response, and you had assumed that one kind of response was the only kind available. There is a quality of attention this work develops that I want to name, because it is one of the most valuable consequences of doing the work, and almost no one talks about it. The quality is something like discernment, but more textured than that. It is the ability to feel, in any given moment, what frequency you are operating from, not by checking your thoughts, by checking the texture of the moment itself. The trying frequency has a specific texture. The waiting frequency has a different texture. The river frequency has a third texture. After a while of doing this work, you do not have to analyze the frequency. You feel it directly. The way a musician feels whether they are in tune. The way a baker feels whether the dough has come together. The way an experienced driver feels whether the car is doing what it should be doing. The feel is direct. The feel does not require thought. The feel becomes the primary instrument of navigation in your life. When you are operating from the river, decisions become both easier and slower. Easier because the internal argument is gone. Slower because you are no longer rushing to resolve the discomfort of the uncertainty. The river is willing to be uncertain. The river is willing to not know the next move. The river does not need to resolve every open question by the end of the day. The river can hold open questions for a long time because the river is not in pain about not knowing. The pain of not knowing was a function of the trying. When the trying softens, the pain of not knowing softens. And the willingness to wait, which is now not the second frequency of waiting but the river's own patient motion, becomes available in a way it never was before. This is the difference between the frequency of waiting and the river. The frequency of waiting is closed waiting, the waiting that hopes, while not quite admitting it hopes. The waiting that broadcasts, I am not yet allowed. The river's waiting is open waiting. The river does not consider itself to be in a state of waiting. The river is moving. The river is doing what it does. If a particular destination has not yet been reached, that is not waiting. That is movement that has not yet arrived. The river does not experience this as deprivation. The river experiences it as the continuation of its own motion. You may not yet be able to feel the difference between closed waiting and open waiting. That is fine. The feeling comes, in time, with the repeated experience of moments where you notice yourself in one and then the other. Eventually you can tell, in any given afternoon, which kind of waiting your body is doing. The closed waiting has a tightness. The open waiting does not. I want to come back, now, to the inner ledger, because there is something about the ledger I have not yet said, and it is important. The inner ledger was set, originally, by survival logic. But the inner ledger is not, in itself, hostile. The inner ledger is not your enemy. The inner ledger is, like the small fist, A faithful servant that has been doing its job for a long time with the parameters it was given. The parameters were set by a child. The parameters have not been updated. But the system that holds the parameters is not malevolent. The system is, in fact, completely available to be updated. It is updated through experience, not through argument. You cannot argue with the inner ledger. You cannot tell the inner ledger, in language, that the conditions have changed. The inner ledger does not speak language. The inner ledger speaks experience. You can only show the inner ledger through repeated experience that the new parameters are also safe. And the showing happens in those small moments. The compliment received, the favor accepted, the rest taken, the help allowed, the gift that did not have to be reciprocated. Each one is a piece of evidence submitted to a court that has been operating with outdated evidence for a long time, and the court is, slowly, revising its rulings as the new evidence accumulates. This is hopeful, if you let it be hopeful. The system is not stuck. The system is not broken. The system is updatable. It just updates on a timeline that is slower than the conscious mind would prefer. And here is a piece of wisdom that came down through traditions you have probably never read, and that does not need a name to be true. The path of release is not the path of dramatic transformation. The path of release is the path of consistent, gentle, repeated noticing. Day after day. The dramatic transformation, when it comes, is the visible consequence of months or years of quiet noticing that no one saw. The dramatic transformation was already happening underneath. The visible part is just the moment when the underneath becomes finally observable from the outside. I want to give you another image, because the river image has carried us a long way, but the image is not the only image that points at this truth. Imagine a house. The house was built a long time ago by people who are no longer here. The house has many rooms. Some of the rooms have been used regularly. Some of the rooms have been closed for years, the doors locked, the contents accumulating dust. The closed rooms are not bad rooms. They were closed because at some point in the history of the house, it was easier to close them than to deal with what was inside. And the closing was made, and the house carried on, with fewer rooms available, and the people who lived in the house adapted to the smaller footprint and forgot, after a while, what was behind the locked doors. You are the person living in that house now. The closed rooms are the parts of your receiving capacity that were locked in early life, because what was inside them was too painful to be felt at the time. The receiving of love that turned out to be conditional. The receiving of praise that turned out to be a setup. The receiving of safety that turned out to be a trick. The doors were closed, and the rooms were forgotten, and the house became smaller without anyone noticing. The work of becoming the river is, in part, the work of slowly opening some of those doors. Not all at once. Not by force. Not with anger at the people who closed them. Just one door at a time, when the time is right, with the willingness to enter the room and see what is in there on the side, as an adult, whether the room can be reclaimed. Some rooms can be reclaimed quickly. The contents were not that bad. The closing was a precaution that turned out to be unnecessary. You open the door, you look, you say, "Oh, this is fine," and the room is yours again. Some rooms take longer. The contents are more difficult. The closing was a real protection against real pain. Those rooms require a slower process. You open the door a crack. You look inside. You close the door again. You come back later. You open it a little wider. Eventually, you can be in the room. The room becomes habitable. The house slowly expands. Each room reclaimed expands the receiving layer. Each room reclaimed gives the inner ledger more space to work with. Each room reclaimed shifts the abundance membrane a little. And the visible life, slowly, reflects the expanding house. This image is useful because it counteracts the temptation to think of this work as a single act. There is no single act that does this. There is no one moment of release that solves it. There is a series of moments, distributed over time, each one a small reclamation, each one a small opening, each one a small piece of evidence submitted to the inner court. The cumulative effect is what changes the life. No single moment is the change. The accumulation is the change. I want to come back to the question that has been quiet in the background of this audio. The question that you may have brought to it without knowing you were bringing it. Why am I, specifically, in this condition? Why did this happen to me and not to someone else? Why did the dam get built in my house and not in the house next door? The honest answer is that this is the wrong question, or at least it is a question that does not lead anywhere useful, even when it is answered. The dam got built where it got built because of the specific conditions of your specific early life, the specific people who were there, the specific moments that occurred, the specific inheritances that were handed across the generations into your room. Some of those conditions can be named. Some cannot. Some have stories attached. Some do not. The naming does not, by itself, do the work. People who can name every detail of their early conditions still have the same dam they had before the naming. The naming is sometimes useful as part of the work, but the naming is not the work. The work is what happens after the naming. The work is the repeated experience of receiving, in small moments, that the new conditions are safe. The work is the slow updating of the inner ledger. The work is the gradual softening of the small fist. The work is the patient reclamation of the closed rooms. These things happen whether or not you have named the original conditions correctly. They happen on the basis of present experience, not past explanation. So you can let go, if you want, of the project of understanding exactly why. The understanding will come, or it will not, and either way the work proceeds. The river does not require an autopsy of the dam in order to move. The river moves when the stones come out, by whatever process the stones come out. The river is patient. The river will accept whatever pathway you find to dismantle the obstruction. The river does not require that you understand the architecture of the obstruction before you begin. This is liberating, if you let it be liberating. The story of why has been, for many people, another stone in the dam. The story of why has been a way of staying focused on the past, of staying loyal to the original conditions, of staying inside the room of the dam even while studying its construction. The story of why can be set down. The dismantling can proceed without it. The dismantling does not require justification. The dismantling requires only attention, applied gently, to the present moments where the structure becomes visible. And the structure becomes visible all day, every day, in the small things. The deflection of the compliment, the preemptive offer to pay, the over-explanation of your need before you accept the help, the exhausted joke about your own brokenness, the half-second of bracing before the app, the unexpected gift you cannot fully enjoy, the favor accepted with the calculation already running about how you will repay it. These are not failures. These are visibility. The structure is becoming visible, and visible structure can be witnessed, and witnessed structure begins to soften, and softened structure does not hold the river back the way it used to. Witnessing is the central act, not changing, not fixing, not trying. Witnessing. The receiving layer cannot be forced to relax. The receiving layer can only be seen, and the seeing, repeated, is what allows the layer to recognize that the observer is no longer in danger, that the closure is no longer being demanded by the conditions, that the protection it has been offering is no longer necessary in the way it used to be. Witnessing is gentle. Witnessing is patient. Witnessing does not punish the receiving layer for closing. Witnessing simply notices, kindly, that the closing happened, and notices what the closing felt like, and notices what was being protected. The protected thing, when witnessed, often shows itself, and the showing is part of the loosening. The structure that was closed for a reason that has not been seen begins to open when the reason is allowed to be seen, with kindness, by an observer who is no longer afraid of it. If there is a practice in this audio, it is the practice of kind witnessing. Not the witnessing that judges. Not the witnessing that interrogates. Not the witnessing that diagnoses. The witnessing that simply sees, without adding anything, what is happening in your body in any given moment. The chest that tightens. The hand that closes. The smile that automatically diminishes the compliment. The shoulders that rise when the favor is offered. See it. That is all. The seeing is enough. The seeing does the work that no amount of effort could do. This is what every contemplative tradition pointed at when it spoke of attention as a sacred capacity. The attention that does not interfere. The attention that does not push. The attention that simply rests on what is occurring with kindness, with patience, with no agenda except to be present to it. This kind of attention is rare. This kind of attention is what the receiving layer was waiting for all along. The receiving layer was not waiting to be fixed. The receiving layer was waiting to be seen. The receiving layer wanted, more than anything, to be witnessed by an observer that was not trying to change it. And here, finally, is the gentle paradox at the heart of this work. Structure that has been in blocking abundance has, all along, been waiting for the kind of attention that does not try to change it. The trying to change it was the very thing that kept it closed. The willingness to see it without changing, it is what allows it to begin to open. You could not have known this earlier. The trying mind cannot grasp this directly. The trying mind tries to apply this insight as a new strategy, and the strategy becomes another act of trying, and the cycle repeats. The insight has to be lived, not strategized. The insight lives in the half-second. The insight lives in the small witnessing. The insight lives in the moments when you catch yourself trying, and instead of fighting the trying, you simply see it with kindness and let the seeing be enough. When the seeing is enough, the trying loosens by itself. Not because you defeated it, because the trying did not survive being seen by an observer that was not afraid of it. The trying was sustained, all those years, by an observer that was afraid of what would happen if the trying stopped. When the observer stops being afraid, the trying has nothing to hold on to. It begins to release, the way a clenched hand releases when the body finally remembers that the threat is no longer in the room. The threat is no longer in the room. The original conditions that required the closure are no longer the conditions of your life. The child who decided that receiving was dangerous made a true decision in a true situation, and the situation has passed, and the child has grown, and the conditions around you now are not the conditions of that household, that classroom, that early relationship. The closure was a poster appropriate to a specific room that you no longer live in. You have left the room. The closure has not yet been told that you left. Telling the closure that you left is not a verbal act. The closure does not speak language. Telling the closure that you left is the act of moving through your present life, again and again, in moments where receiving is possible, and demonstrating, by the actual receiving, that the present conditions are not the past conditions. The closure, over time, gets the message. The closure relaxes. The closure becomes available to be replaced with a different posture, a posture of openness that the body had to forget, but that has been there underneath the closure the whole time, waiting to be rediscovered. This is what the original frequency was. Not something you have to invent, something you have to remember. The original frequency was the frequency of openness that all children begin with before the closures get installed. The closures are installed for reasons that are real in the moment of their installation. But the original openness was the original state. The closures are layers on top of the original openness. The work of becoming the river is the work of letting the layers slowly dissolve until what is left is what was there before any of the layers ever went on. Frequency return, as we named it earlier, is the moment when the original openness, however briefly, becomes available again. It does not require you to do anything. It requires you to stop doing the thing that was preventing it. When the trying softens, even for a second, frequency return becomes possible. You may have already experienced this in the course of this audio. There may be a moment in the last hour where you felt, very briefly, an opening that you did not produce on purpose. That was frequency return. It does not last at first. It comes and goes, but each time it comes, it leaves a small impression, and the small impressions accumulate, and over time the frequency return becomes more available, more frequent, more sustained. This is the trajectory of the work. Brief returns at first, longer returns as the receiving layer softens. Eventually, a baseline that is closer to the original frequency than it is to the closure. Not a constant euphoria, not a perfect state, just a new baseline, a new home base that the nervous system can return to that is more open than the old home base was. The new home base is the river. The old home base was the dam. The shift between them is not a single moment. It is a gradual relocation of where the body considers itself to live. Notice what happened to your shoulders in the last hour. Notice what happened to the tightness in the chest that was there when you pressed play. Something in you opened that has been closed for years. You did not learn that. It returned. The shoulders did not lower because you decided to lower them. The breath did not deepen because you instructed it to deepen. Something underneath the decision shifted, and the body responded to the shift. That is the receiving layer beginning to remember its original shape. What this audio has not touched, because it cannot be touched in a single sitting, is why some people appear to receive abundance without any of this work at all. You have met them. You have wondered about them. You have probably resented them, hitly, at some point, and then felt bad about the resentment. Why do they get to be in the river without ever having known the dam existed? That question opens into something that changes the shape of everything we have covered here. There is an honest answer to it, but the honest answer is not a sentence. The honest answer is a body of understanding that has to be met when the time is right. You will meet it. You will not meet it in another audio. You will meet it in the moment when the next ordinary opportunity arrives in your day, and you notice that you did not close before it landed. That noticing will be the beginning of the answer. The answer will unfold from there, in your life, in a tempo that cannot be set by anyone but you. The river was already here. You were just standing in it.